Welcome. This is a panel for hyperdimensional interference and the keys to discernment, with some talk about reptilian aspects of interference. An earlier panel was done with the same individuals present about the love bite and the dark side of Cupid, which actually are both of my books. And I don't want to really overkill with that, because we've already talked about it with our last panel about the relationship interference and how all that manifests with love relationships, based on how I observed this with my own research with alien abductions and anomalous trauma. By the way, my name is Eve Lorgan. I forgot to even introduce myself, but I'll just go ahead and introduce everybody here who's going to take part in the panel. Myself and James Bartley. And he's done a lot of work and tons of work with reptilian research over the years, 20 plus years, a colleague of mine. And we have Tom Montauk and Carissa Conte, who've also done research with probably 20 years worth about, and excellent websites, by the way. I'm going to let you introduce your own websites and your own articles that are relevant to our discussion. And we have Bernard Gunther, who's been with us before on the last panel. He's also doing research with hyperdimensional interference. A lot of healing issues come up in his own work, and he's talked publicly about this as well. And then Laura Leone, my colleague, and she's had numerous experiences and knows a lot about this phenomena, anomalous trauma, the reptilian possession issue, as well as what she calls forensic profiling, not only on a psychological level, but also on an occult paranormal level, which makes it very interesting, because this is actually something we've observed over the years, also in the Dark Side of Cupid book, that when these interference phenomena happen, let's say in personal relationships or love relationships, oftentimes there is the perception of a paranormal factor, or what we call a third-party entity presence, which could be an alien, it could be an interdimensional being, it could be, a demon, it could be any other being that's observed by someone. So there is that presence that's also observed sometimes with personality disorders. So we may cover some of that this time. And the reason I guess we wanted to go with hyperdimensional interference is because this definitely extends beyond, let's say, the love relationship or the alien abduction phenomena with ETs or aliens. That there's a transdimensional aspect to this that's interfering in our reality. And it's happening more and more. I think people are starting to wake up to this presence, and it's happening in benevolent ways as well as malevolent ways, or interfering or disrupting ways. And one of the areas that we felt was necessary to talk about has to do with the keys of discernment, and how do we really identify this when it's happening and not something that we're making up. So discernment is really important in terms of identifying what's happening, and also learning how to take personal responsibility so that we don't blame everything else on what our own unresolved issues are, because sometimes that happens, and we're going to talk at length with all of this. So I'm just going to go ahead and open up the floor to, I'm going to let Bernard share a little bit about maybe why we decided to go into the hyperdimensional interference aspect to cover more elements that extend beyond, quote, the love bite and the dark side of Cupid. And I'll just go ahead.
All right. So, one of the, as you mentioned before, Evie, one of the things I noticed in this day and age is that a lot of people are starting to wake up to the phenomena, to really start seeing their own lives and take it more seriously, as opposed to many years ago. But I see also a lot of confusion. Some people, when they first get into this material, they think it's like science fiction, or something very bizarre, which is very outside their reality bubble, so to speak. And on that point, I also want to point out, we're going to mention a lot of things in a nutshell, basically, although it's going to be a long webinar. A lot of information, and I think I can speak for all of us. We don't expect for anyone for us to believe anything, but do your own research, right? On all our websites, we have a lot of articles and books written, and a lot of resources where people can research that for themselves, right? But what it really comes down to, from a macro perspective, bigger picture perspective, is, we are in very intense times right now. I call it the time of transition. Everything is, everything is more coming up, the dark and light, everything is being more exposed. There's information overload, especially over the internet. And it's hard to discern, what is true, what is, what not. And then we're going through our own inner development and struggle and suffering to try to fit into this world, right? And like many of us on this path, we all dealt with disillusionment, and our own suffering started the quest to, seek truth, basically, right? And what I've noticed, like, as many of us, we kind of start on the 3D level of the matrix, right? Where we see that just on the basic level, the corruption of of government, religion, just basic social engineering, social conditioning, education, all of that, people just keeping us like clogs in a machine, right? And then, we see all the atrocities done by governments and what's happening in the world, all the misery, all the suffering. And a lot of activists focus on that, and they try to fight the matrix on a 3D level, right? But what's really happening, and what we're getting deeper into now, is that the 3D matrix is just really a manifestation of symptom of the hyperdimensional matrix, right? Which uses humans, their puppets, even world leaders or political figures or even secret societies, and all these elements of the 3D matrix to work through for their agenda, right? And the agenda has always been to keep us in a frequency prison, on a lower form of consciousness based on ego consciousness, physical survival, and fear, right? And ultimately, we are their food source. So to bring in a nutshell, humanity is not on top of the food chain. We're literally being farmed for our frequency and energy. They're like soul eaters, light eaters. And most often they feed off of negative emotions through friction, fear, suffering, all that is initiated through interpersonal fighting or on the world scale through wars and all of that. And that's the frequency they like. And you can go even further back. Basically, we as humanity have been taken over hundreds and thousands of years ago by unseen hyperdimensional non-physical entities who have also genetically manipulated, interfered with us, with our natural development, right? And that's a big issue because most people don't question human nature. Or we say this is just human nature, the wars and just the way we always behave, it's just the way it is, always has been, it's just ego and whatnot. But, when you really dive deeper into this topic and really like also do your own self-work, then you realize that there's something else operating. And I feel many of us who have done really also a lot of self-work and get the knowledge, we see that there's some sort of alien virus and hyperdimensional influence that really has taken this earth hostage, right? To keep it enclosed in this frequency prison. And most people are not aware of it, especially people who are not completely plugged into the matrix and don't do any self-work and just go along with the program. They may not even notice that force. Even Muraviev calls it the general law in his book Gnosis, and he writes that as long as you go along with everybody else, the general law will ignore you because it doesn't need to intersect because you're just the clog in the machine. You don't pose a threat. But the moment you really start to wake up, so to speak, or start to ask the question, right? Or like Neo, follow the white rabbit, speak truth, do your research, start self-work, start speaking out, then you attract the attention of the hyperdimensional matrix more. And that's which ties into the topic we'll be discussing today, hyperdimensional interference and how it looks like, right? And hyperdimensional interference can happen basically on two general main points, be it through ourselves, through the predator mount, thought injections, emotional manipulation, abductions, or thought injection, as I said, or all kinds of stuff where we've been triggered from within, or through others, when others who are not on the path, not engaged in any sincere self-work, don't have that knowledge, are they being used as portals trying to get to us. And most often, they target these hyperdimensional entities through ourselves or through others, our own particular blind spots, right? Our own weaknesses and blind spots and wounds, right? And it's not that obvious, these attacks, how they happen sometimes, because it's kind of like Michael Topper talked about it. Satan most often appears as angels of light, right? It can be happen through, like, you may love by may meet your soulmate, your twin flame, and all this ego flattery and great connection, or they lure you in, or, you know, we as researchers out there have been also had our experiences with other people, you know, kind of ego pampering us and just trying to lure us in, trying to open us up, and then, you know, getting the entry and then kind of attack us that way. So, you know, I think sets the stage from the bigger picture perspective in terms of what we're dealing with, and then we can move into how this hyperdimensional interference, these attacks affect us personally, and how to differentiate and discern, because there are also aspects what I've noticed, a lot of people who first get into this topic or experiences put themselves into victim consciousness, you know, because it's really important to take self-responsibility for everything. Or also paranoia, you know, which some people, I realize, they don't actually experience these hyperdimensional interferences, but they create these thought forms because of paranoia, where these thought forms become entities and feed upon them, but they're not really, like, related to the hyperdimensional matrix. So that's my, you know, intro, so to speak.
Great.
Well, Laura, who wanted to talk?
I just wanted to add to what Bernard's saying with regards to a lot of clients that come to me are always baffled by what it was that they did in their lives to allow this to enter. Because there are differences between possession and hosting, and manipulation, interference, targeting. So, and a lot of this has to do with agreements of entrapment, conscious or unconscious. But as one client said to me, the severe possession came on after he was involved in sororities in university, and he did all these pledges, and then under the guise of something that would appear to be normal in a setting like that, which is, you know, your typical educational setting, your typical day-to-day life setting, which is how they want to invade, because this is how they want to, it's like an illusion. They want to create in society what the norm is, and then have everybody join it without really knowing what they're joining. And Freemasonry works on this premise as well, because even my dad said the deeper he would go into the rituals, he knew he was getting attachment. He knew he was falling deeper and deeper in. So there are differences between how possession versus hosting versus just, you know, setup interference works. And maybe we could discuss what those are and what that looks like, as Bernard was saying, on a macro and micro level. So which we would like to go into what Tom and Carissa have to say, because Carissa wrote a really good article not that long ago, which really does explain some of these setups and some of this exchanges that happen in, quote, the normal surroundings or the normal world on a day-to-day level.
Do you want to start? Or?
Oh, good.
Okay. Well, I'm Carissa Connie, and I have a website called intwoworlds.net. And like Laura was just mentioning, I have my article on the website. It was called Interference, so it's easy to remember. And it was basically anything and everything I could think to say about this subject. But one of the article started out discussing how there's macrocosm interference on a planetary wide level that has altered basically the whole course and destiny of planet Earth and people. And then there's also interference on a microcosm level that happens on the two individuals, as Bernhard mentioned. Hyperdimensional, I think we should start by defining what that even means, just so there's no confusion with the listening audience. Hyperdimensional meaning outside of our dimension. It's basically anything, the way I define it and the way I've seen it, is something that's not physical. it's not residing in our realm. It's something that's elsewhere. Whether it's, you could say alien, however one wants to define that, interdimensional, demonic, as Eve mentioned at the beginning, just something that's outside of our plane of existence that is influencing the way things go here. And it seems that all cultures around the world have stories about this. Everybody calls it by something, different, whether you call it the jinn or you call it demons, angels, aliens, but it's just something that's not human and not physical, that's outside of our realm, and it's influencing everything that's happening on this planet. I don't even know where.
Well, I mean, with what we consider, what would you define as conventional mainstream interference, right? I mean, it would be, I don't know, having a friend who riles you up, or having an abusive father, having a bad upbringing. Okay, that's all within conventional explanation. Well, what happens if, for example, you have an etheric or astral entity, some sort of a dark energy form, let's say, that follows you around like almost like a dark cloud over your head, biasing your thoughts, biasing your emotions, deviating your thoughts in a direction that cannot be explained solely by your environment or by your genetics or your, media programming or anything like that. It's this external X factor that has influenced human history and can influence, your daily awareness in ways that just cannot be accounted for in a conventional way. So that's what we're talking about by this hyperdimensional interference.
Right.
And its origins do seem to be non-physical. Okay. Now, whether that just means some sort of a literal fourth dimension, or whether it means some sort of a different layer of reality, like something that's less physical, more energy-based, for example. It can be anything within or anything outside of the box of physicality, this mainstream consensus reality that we're in. So that's what we're talking about here. Aliens, demons, some people call them, even ghosts, people who die, but they don't go into the afterlife. They just kind of hang around. I mean, it's a popular subject of movies because it's actually based on real research and real experiences. And, some people might be wondering, well, how do you know that these entities even exist? What's the basis of it? Why are we talking about it? Well, the reason is because children, for example, a lot of them they don't have their psychic faculties shut down yet. So a lot of them can see these energies, these entities. And that's where this whole thing about, monsters in the bedroom, in the closet, under the bed, and, screaming at night. I mean, when I was a kid, my first word, it wasn't mom or dad, it was Geist, because I lived in Germany at the time. So Geist or ghost was my first word because, I remember being in a crib and this pale face with, beady black eyes just kind of looking in over the side of the crib, and it scared the heck out of me because I'd be screaming Geist at the top of my lungs. So I saw these things as a kid, and I know people who are clairvoyant who can see them. People who have night terrors or sleep paralysis episodes. They say that sleep paralysis is just a form of, your body's in dream mode, and the body part is shut down, but your mind is still aware, so you're having hallucinations. But it's not completely true, because a clairvoyant looking at a person who's sleeping, they actually see some of the subtle energy, raising from the physical. Okay, so they can see the soul separating from the body slightly when a person goes to sleep or is sleeping. And I've also had it where I've woken up out of a dream state where my physical body wasn't yet attached to my soul. So I was kind of hovering above, almost like an out-body experience. And in that state, I was able to see things in the room that weren't physical. Okay, I've seen what some would describe as etheric thought forms, just like geometric etheric structures floating around. I've seen, one time I saw what looked like a Nordic female woman standing by my bed. And as a kid, I've seen, demonic beings with glowing red eyes or glowing blue eyes, for example.
I've woken up and seen what they call the shadow people. It's like a shadow figure just standing there. And in my case, this happened in this apartment, actually. I woke up in the middle of the night. It's like you feel someone staring at you. And there was, it's like a guy, it's like a shadow of a man, it's all black. And it was standing about 5 feet from my bed, just watching me. When it became aware of the fact that I had woken up, it turned to slowly go and walked through the wall and disappeared. So.
Yeah, and the thing that really convinces me is that a lot of times when we've seen these things ourselves, We had a cat, this really cool cat named Kitty.
We used to have a cat who could a lot of times just corroborated.
She'd be tracking the thing that we were seeing with her own eyes. So
animals are, they have their psychic antennas as well. Dogs, cats, very good at seeing things that humans oftentimes can't see. So
as far as we're concerned, these things are definitely a reality. And once you get past that initial question of are they real or not, and you start, okay, well, what if they are real? What does that imply? What does that explain that other things cannot explain? And that starts unraveling all these mysteries of human behavior, human history. Just even what we're seeing on the internet now with, well, we'll get into that, with certain personalities on there and what they're doing, the various occult agendas that are going on. It reveals a whole side of things that... Yeah,
it's like a Pandora's box, and it's a can of worms. Like once you have experiences for yourself where you're seeing that there's these things going on in this world that are, then you begin to, it just leads to other questions like how prevalent are they? How strong their influence is? What are they doing? Where are they from?
Yeah.
So
that's very interesting, very important about being as children more psychic, sensible or sensitive. It ties also with a lot of children having an invisible friend, right, and all of that. But then it makes so much sense, with what I mentioned before from a bigger picture perspective, how we're right away being indoctrinated. Children with the education system, with the whole upbringing, and not trusting yourself, like this whole external information, nothing learning anything about your emotional development or your psychic being and whatnot, and shutting down our higher sensory perception, because that's what they bank on and need, in order to stay hidden, right? So, because then we see also the corruption of science, of mainstream five sensory based science. And then all people always say, well, you have no proof. Can you prove this? But with the state of our science in this day and age, you cannot possibly prove something that's outside our range of perception. And that's really what it comes down to, right? And I'm not a clairvoyant. People always ask me if I've ever seen these entities. Like in certain dream states I have here and there, more visual representations and encounters. But most often within myself now, and then with others people at work, it's more like a sensing, like a deeper sensing that goes even beyond the five senses. And I feel the more you really work on yourself, work your own stuff, and can really connect to spirit, your higher self, have a more conscious connection and get rid of all your stuff, your conditioning, the more you can really tap into these realms and really sense them and discern them as well.
Well, and the thing about how they operate oftentimes, because they've had millions of years to do so and to learn our psychology, and they're masters at our psychology and our psyche, harnessing our psychic abilities, our quantum abilities, but they've had to become shapeshifters within themselves to be able to deceive us to the point where they had to mimic our own thoughts to ourselves so that we wouldn't be able to even distinguish what's ours from what's theirs. So their abilities are very, very seductive, very, very, very extreme on multiple levels, which is also something we should look at, because at times it could be very obvious that it's from an outside force because you even hear it audibly. But then at other times it's as subtle and seductive as them giving you a thought that you perceive as your own and coming from your own origin, even though it's not typically what or how you would think or feel, because they also implant emotions. They rig us emotionally too. So, there are very many at work here, and many shapeshifts, and many, it's just like the angel of light. Is it an angel of light? What is light? Is light only light because of how we perceive it in this reality, on this dimensional plane? They play with all these tricks. So even the way that our eyes are made physically, which their body is their technology also, which is something we need to look at. But even how they created just the way that our eyes perceive this three-dimensional plane is really to give them the advantage.
That's a good point.
And children are the ones that sometimes can go beyond beyond that, and I remember being a kid, I would always see, I saw a lot of activity, a lot of that, and then realized that something happened to my perception, even in color, when I started becoming a teenager. I actually noticed changes in how I was perceiving in regards to how I was perceiving in the past when I was younger. So there are changes that take place that I think people don't even realize happen, but the body is their technology. So they have a lot to play with.
And I wanted to add really quick that despite how advanced they are and seemingly all powerful, because of the fact that, you know, they're outside of linear time and they're not constrained by physicality like we are, they don't seem to have the limitations that we often have. And the fact is, they're not as all powerful as they may seem. And sometimes, their tricks, it's just so obvious, it gives them away. And how you mentioned that they've had all this time to become masters of our psychology. Something I mentioned throughout my website is I recommend the work of Robert Bruce, who wrote a book called Practical Psychic Self-Defense, because there's something that he mentions throughout that book, which is that these neg entities, whatever they are often they're two-dimensional. You know, as all powerful as they seem, they're actually two-dimensional in a lot of ways, and they use the same tactics on everybody across the board oftentimes, and they don't try to tailor them to fit a unique individual and their unique personality and intelligence. They just kind of take the general thing that it's worked on a bunch of people before, so we'll just do it on everybody. And that's a weakness of theirs, and their two-dimensional nature is a weakness. And there's a lot of weaknesses that they do have that I would like to explore hopefully in this discussion, so that people don't feel like it's hopeless. And okay, we have these all powerful entities, hyperdimensional interference. They have absolute control over this reality. It's hopeless. They can know that it's not hopeless, and they don't completely control us. There are rules and laws, and there is a such thing as free will. And these are all things that hopefully we're gonna get into.
And that's exactly the part about why they've rigged this reality to remove knowledge,
right?
Keep us in a state of near comatose, really, just being physical, because they're harnessing our own quantum ability, because we're the ones that are unlimited. But they had to remove all the knowledge, all of the sacred knowledge, even of who and what we are, our past, even the reset buttons, the continual reset buttons, because if otherwise it wouldn't work, because we are the ones with the power.
I just want to make a point. I mean, because it reminded me when you talked about the parasitic nature of these and how they're inserting thoughts, but it's very much like how it was discussed in the Nag Hammadi of the Gnostic tractates about the demiurge and the archons and the mind parasites. Is pretty much how they operate on that lower frequency. And I think that's part of what we're dealing with. But it's also true about the whole two-dimensional aspect, which I find really interesting, because that was also found in Dr. Corrado Malanga's work when he assessed these alien parasites, the different kinds that would show up in abductees, and when they basically were doing depossession, but we found different kinds of parasites that would enter a certain way, and they do a lot of mimicking and copying. So that's definitely a factor there. But you can get rid of them, once you know how they operate. So
what Carissa's point is very important, because that's really the Achilles heel, the lack of creativity. And we all maybe learned it the hard way, because looking back, we talked about the love bite, right? All the red flags. So part of you is always aware, but we just it's our learning process, you know what I mean? And more tapping into to our own self work, and also gaining knowledge. That's what I really want to, tell the audience as well. Gaining knowledge and understanding is really important, because knowledge protects, and all of us, even we do these videos, and all of us have amazing articles on all our individual websites and written books. So there's a lot of information on our website, which I really encourage any listener and viewer to go there and read, because people ask me so many questions sometimes, which all can be answered if they would just read the articles, right? And I know in this day and age, there's a little bit of a short attention span epidemic going on and all of that, but there's no shortcut. You need to sometimes, you need to take time and study and learn and read, and the old information is where, most of our articles especially Tom's and Carissa's and mine, are really great summaries of the topics with great resources, of books and other experiences. So it's really about, giving that effort to really gain that knowledge and really learn, right? Because you cannot really, so many people want the truth spoon-fed, and it's not really possible, especially with this kind of knowledge.
Yeah.
And once you do learn and you begin, when you read people's research and experiences, you begin to see what their tricks are. And again, they just tend to use the same stuff on everybody across the board. And then you'll become aware. And then going forward, things, maybe you'll be able to recognize things in your life that you wouldn't have noticed before. And then suddenly it just becomes so transparent. You almost wonder, like, how did I not see that? And the same, whether it's abuse of people in your life or actual, just hyperdimensional, paranormal woo-woo stuff happening, you'll recognize it and see it for what it is, and then become empowered that way. And we can be empowered. It's not all powerful. I mean, there is a lot we can do.
James?
A point, excuse me. A point should be made also that modern science took a wrong turn with Einstein, and before that with Newton and other big luminaries in the scientific field. Everything is reduced to a long mathematical equation, and the academic community produces people that think linear terms, that think in a very 3D reductionist mindset, whereas one goes into the past, into the distant past, as Evie pointed out, with the Gnostics talking about the demiurge. There was this general understanding from people at the highest levels of society down to people that were considered commoners or peasants or whatever the case may be, that there was this hidden hand working to basically enslave humanity and manipulate our reality at our own. And when one looks in the ancient times, for example, and up to the modern time, there was different ways that people propitiated these gods, if you will. In the old days, the centrality of the gods in the people's lives was a given. Military campaign, a commander like Alexander the Great would go into a temple and sacrifice a bull, or they would have a large mass scale or a sacrificial offering to the gods. And then you have more evolved cultures that would have ceremonies where tobacco would be offered, or alcohol, or something of value. Think about some of the South American cultures, the Native American cultures, and they had their own way of interacting with these unseen spirits and these unseen entities, and specific about who they interacted with. They wanted only, like the more positively inclined cultures, to interact with, acknowledge, respect those unseen influences that were beneficial and which they perceived as being stewards and guardians and helpers. So it must be understood for the layperson watching this that it's only in recent times that there was this general that only something that is tangible, only something you can hold, only something you can measure is real. And everything reduced to a mathematical equation, which shunts us into the left hemisphere of the brain, further enmeshing us into this matrix. So that should be pointed out. And how this does affect us on a micro scale, a lot of you have already alluded to this, where beings up till the recent past, and I do believe things, as Carissa pointed out, the fundamental constants are changing. Tide has turned, but in the past, in the recent past even, these beings, these interdimensional beings, have had the tactical and high ground because they existed beyond time. They exist beyond the 3D physical realm. It's easy for them, for people who've been lodged into this 3D linear way of thinking. It makes the latter very vulnerable. And an example. I'm sure all of you are familiar with that ranch in Utah where the Bigelow Foundation and CIA fronts, actually, National Institute of Discovery Science, sent teams to the Skinwalker Ranch. There's actually a book, Skinwalker Ranch, and they brought in teams with all this sensor equipment, all this electronic equipment, people with scientific backgrounds, and the nature of that ranch, it seemed to me to be a big interdimensional vortex area. And the entities that were working there basically made a mockery of all the technology, all the equipment, all the sensors that the scientific experts brought with them. They shut the equipment, they made the equipment malfunction, they made the equipment give bad readings. That's another aspect of this alien artificial intelligence hyperdimensional manipulation, is this ghost in the machine effect, which has affected a lot of this field who do our best to try to get meaningful, valid information out. It seems to me those things don't seem to happen to those people who are in the, basically our matrix sentinels that are here to give disinformation, promote deception, promote confusion, acrimony. They don't seem, at least outwardly, from the outside looking in, to have these kinds of problems. It's only when people make a decision to put meaningful, valid information out, practical information that people can sink their teeth into, that's when these kinds of interference. And it should be understood also from the micro standpoint. Again, going back to ancient times and the traditional societies, there was an understanding, a consensus understanding that these unseen influences could have, if we were unwary and if we were in a vulnerable state due to emotional, physical distress, whatever the case may be, we'd be vulnerable to their depredations. We'd be vulnerable to their malign influence. And we can look at examples of addictions. If someone is sexually addicted, out of the blue, get this compulsion. If they're sitting there watching television or they're sitting at home and they're bored and got nothing to do, they may have this overwhelming compulsion in their car and drive across town to a strip club. If someone is trying to break a drug addiction habit or try to detach themselves, and I'm not making any value judgments here, but bad association, i.e. people that do self-destructive things, whether it's excessive use or it's other self-destructive behaviors, and a person is making a conscious effort to detach themselves from such association, a compulsion within them can become so strong, whether it's, and what happens is all these unresolved issues within us that we have and worked out start to come into play, where we feel the need to become socially engaged. We feel the need to get out and interact with, because of whatever unresolved issues we have, despair, loneliness, lack of self-worth, self-loathing. All these are constantly engendered. OCD thought forms begin to bounce around an individual's head like an echo chamber, and suddenly, because they're bored, because they want to get high, whatever the case may be, there they go. They're going to a place where they know they're going to meet people who are indulging in excessive substance abuse, excessive drinking, and all that kind of activity really feeds into this kind of feedback loop kind of cycle. So we must be cognizant of this malign influence, however subtle it itself. Even in the more patriarchal, harsh religions, there was an understanding, although they always took it to extreme, but there was an understanding that the devil made him do it, or that he or she has the mark of the devil, or look, the baby was born chin or like a hair lip or something, it's the mark of the devil. So that's an example of these organizations and these religions take extremes, but on a very base level, there was an understanding that there was this malign influence at work. So if we can move away, if the listeners can move away from the reductionist kind of 3D tangible, I need proof, I need something to sink my, I encourage them to find the book about the Skinwalker Ranch, find out what happened to that team there and how they were confounded, because people that have that kind of bogus scientific mindset are the ones that are most threatened by confronting information. And I've come across people who are about any of this stuff, and I ask them, well, you're middle-aged, haven't you experienced anything unusual in your whole life? And they stop and think more than once, and then they go on, they relate some hyperdimensional experience or a UFO sighting that is spectacular. I was talking to a guy one time who was skeptical about UFOs. He lived near Barksdale Air Force Base. He was out fishing one night, and he had this experience where this large, glowing orange sphere came right up close to him.
Oh, he probably got knocked off. So,
well, I just want to use that to respond to some stuff James said, which is really good and really important. First of all, the reductionist mindset and how we've been manipulated not to even go there, but also that ties into what the examples he mentioned about sex addiction or going to a bar and just, following your desires unexamined, ties into what Laura said before, how they know our physiology and psychology, and that ties basically into what Don Juan said in Castellanos, the active side of infinity, about the predator who came out of space and took over humans and engaged in this stupendous maneuver, he said, because the predator gave us their mind, right? So there's because they partly, quote unquote, created us or genetically engineered us, so there's part of them in us we don't question, and that's how they operate. And we don't question because, like, for example, going to a bar, not even strip club, bar, like people just getting drunk, getting in this very low frequency and this very, like, animalistic, predatorial luge with people hooking up with each other. And you see, like, when you're really going with a higher perception, you see this, it's infested with entities, or also the mob quality, when you see, what James talked about as well, which also ties into group entities, which hovers over all, like, mobs, or like how revolutions are started, and all this, luge of violence and anger is just being, sucked up, or even sporting events and all these crowds and all of it, or of worship, even with political events, which I see now in the elections, and people just worshiping their candidate. Any worship, be it your political candidate, guru, or priest, it's just food for them, right? That's what they want, that luge, because you give away your own power that way.
And I wanted to add something with to what James had said. Well, the whole the extreme skepticism thing, it's just another side of the coin of mindlessness and mindless believers. They're just two sides of the same coin. But I just wanted to put in that discernment is good, and there, healthy skepticism where you question things and you don't automatically just believe what everybody's saying. That's actually a good thing. It's something I encourage in my articles. I don't want people just mindlessly believing and getting caught up in stuff. But so I just want to put that out there, that we're not saying that, everyone needs to be, crazy and superstitious. Definitely discernment is a good thing. And
you don't want to fall into blind belief or like extreme skepticism.
Exactly. Be balanced. So, and in my case, I went for a period of time where I tried on atheism for like a couple years. But it just got to a point where my experiences were to such a level, there was no denying it anymore. And to try to keep denying it was just ridiculous. It's like trying to pound a square peg into a round hole. It's like you're just grasping at straws to try to find excuses to deny what is just right in front of your face. So, just so anybody in the listening audience understands, like, why would I believe in things? I've just seen enough. It's just there was no denying it anymore.
Like paranormal experiences?
Paranormal. The woo, as I call it. So
I think I would also really like to talk and discuss, James, he highlighted this as well, where a lot of the hosting that is occurring, and possession even, is predicated on a lot of what is being passed off as normal, which is porn. Porn is free on the internet. I mean, somehow the government, they have this power and control that they can just shut down what they don't want people to have access to, but with porn, they seem to be helpless. So, you know, that's accidental? No, that's not accidental. So that aspect of it, and just what that does to a person's evolution when they embark on those infections, because I do believe that's an infection that sets in. You know, I mean, I look at that as a, you know, like an entity spore or spawning in you, and just the degree, right, and just how that leads into all the other things. And it really is, it's become this wild contagion.
You see it nowadays with, I don't know if you guys heard of Tinder, that app, which is basically an iconic app. Like people just hooking up to have one night stands or whatever, to have sex. A lot of young people just based on swiping and pics. And that's it. And it's, you know, like you said, it's normalized. It's even like a good thing. It boosts your ego. Here tonight I got laid again with somebody from Tinder. It's huge, you know. And people can question.
I just wanted to say one thing about, because James had brought up this strip club, because that was a huge thing that happened with one of my clients who observed her husband actually became hosted over time by attending strip clubs and becoming sex addicted by attending repeatedly particular types of strip clubs and behaviors. And this person was clairvoyant as well as an artist. So she was able to see clairvoyantly with her, quote, third eye, not only like a type of reptilian imagery that appeared, but also the technology associated with that, with some kind of technology that is interdimensional at the same time, that infected him through strippers and prostitutes that were servicing him within certain strip clubs. That and then she even drew some pictures. So I can do a screen share if you want of two small pictures. I mean, because this is on my website, by the way, and I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see this. There's two small pictures. I don't know if you can see them, but what she saw was there's a strip club with activities going on, but she saw a cone-shaped energy thing that emanated actually from a UFO that was visible and invisible. And it had some kinds of energies and cords and different things that linked in with the people that was linked in with the UFO. And that these things actually opened his energy field up. So she was actually shown in a meditation through deep prayer and meditation, like basically what happened to her husband, because she knew there was an entity. It was actually a hosting situation, which is different, as Laura said, as full possession, because full possession is where the entity is fully in all the time. But in this situation, she actually observed the entity basically standing in the back. And it was actually more visible during the sex act itself, where the entity actually came in fully in the body only during the orgasmic event, which was a short period of time, and then it came out again. And so that kind of thing happens. But she noticed also this iguana kind of figure on his shoulder that was outlined in a type of electric blue or a neon blue, and then also hooked in with some kind of white cube thing. But the real energetic structure was actually the overshadowed reptilian image, which is a lot larger than the body. And those are drawn by many people in the field, where it's basically a very large, tall reptilian entity that's overshadowed and in the back, and they may link in through the heart chakra or the sexual chakra. So this is what she observed over time, that, you know, he became robotic and he was sex addicted, but she actually saw the technology in her third eye that was linked in with the craft and with the people. So there was like a dual kind of thing going on here, with that there was an infection that happened over time. So I think this happens with certain kinds of porn addiction, that it bombards your mind with imagery, but it's as if something is literally coming through the technology now, because it changes your behaviors, and you can have sudden compulsions or even telepathic things happening when you're on the computer. And I've had people report that to me. So it changes their behavior, and it changes what they need to become aroused by over time. So I think it's an unnatural thing. It's actually opening people up to types of interdimensional technologies and hosting situations.
Can you describe what she said her her partner was like prior to this versus what he was at the end?
Well, I think it's a process over time, definitely, because I had another client who observed this over time in actually a husband, ex-husband, and it did take place over time. And in fact, one of my articles on the internet, which was from, I think, the year 2000, 2004, I don't know what year, it was called The Birth of a Host, and the process by step-by-step process of how the reptilian hosting and possession takes place over time in the person, with the personality changes as well as the energy body changes that are observable by a clairvoyant. So that kind of thing happens over time. So the woman who had the strip club husband, he was just, I think he was naturally narcissistic and somewhat abusive, but he wasn't hosted. But as he attended strip clubs over time, his personality did drastically change to becoming much more robotic, as well as she actually noticed the body odor changed to a more, actually something offensive to her, like a complete pheromone turnoff to her. So and I've heard this from other people who've had hosting situations where the pheromones are like awful. And I've heard this through many cases. There's something to that their smell changes actually. And then, you observe the robotic behaviors and the copying and the mimicking and the triggering in the, let's say, the reptilian host. If you're doing something really spiritual, you're doing a lot of praying or meditating or trying to engage in positive healing behaviors, they'll do things to sabotage that, or they'll become extremely agitated and try to stop. Like this man would try to stop her from meditating and doing the things. She was literally raising her vibration. She was actually a phenomenal person who was able to finally get out of the situation. And it was actually much more complex than just her husband's situation. It involved a large company. And you just have to read the article, the UFOs and strip clubs, the part 2, because there was much more involved. And in fact, based on what she was going through with her observation of what was going on in a local town with respect to this large multinational corporation was trying to impose their business and to build bio-incinerators in this community, which was a small mountain community, by the way, without even telling or getting the permission of all the local agricultural farmers. But they were trying to basically take over the town and the town meeting to impose what they wanted to do. But this woman, being extremely clairvoyant, actually saw that these high-level people who were like these big CEO types of this other corporation, it was huge, that they were literally non-humans appearing as humans. And she was able to not only notice it, but affect their energy in the meeting, by the way, with her prayers with another woman, because they were both really aware, and they both affected the behaviors of the people in the meeting so that they weren't so mind controlled by these reptilian hosts who were basically taking over this meeting. So I think it was a good example. You're going to have to read the details in the article, but it's an example of how we can take back our power without having to be overly confrontive, but basically raising our vibration, tuning in with our spirit, and basically affecting the frequency and mirroring it back to them so that they can't continue in these kinds of behaviors, because they're doing a lot of type of hypnosis and trickery, and as if they're putting spells on people in these community meetings so that they'll just vote on whatever they want. And she observed this process clearly, and it was pretty amazing. And I'm getting kind of off topic here, but I had to mention it.
But, since we're on the sex topic, and discernment and desires, and we talked about before how they can manipulate behaviors and emotions and feelings, that's why it's so important, in terms of protection and discernment, our self-work. Because it's about clearing your emotions and feelings and not just do what you feel like doing. So many people say, oh, I just feel sexual, it's like past girlfriends or even guys, I'm just sexual, I need to engage, they don't question the desires, right? So for example, I know this one girl who's very aware, was just got into these topics, and she conveyed to me it was a year ago or a half year ago that she, all of a sudden feel the sexual urge and desires and that longing to be with a man and just have sex, but she felt something was off, so she wasn't acting on it. And she was then seeing that same woman I've been working with, which you guys told you about before, that shaman woman, kind of very aware of these topics and can see what interferences are happening. So what she found out in the session with her, that there was an etheric implant in her second chakra, intensifying these sexual urges. And basically this, because her issue in life is that she felt stuck and not creative. So this implant was absorbing all that creative energies, which that's all sexual energy is, creative energy, right? And kind of like, if, you know, funnel it in more like animalistic sexual desire and try to get her to act on it, and block her from really like becoming more creative in her whole life, right? So it's really important to question, you know, it's also on that note, we're not here about demonizing sex or sexual desires or shaming people, right? This is not about shaming people. It's about a healthy expression of this powerful energy, right? And especially in a loving relationship, or also understanding what sexual energy is really on the base level, which is creative energy.
And people should just always question. That's something I've also talked about in my articles is, you know, question all your thoughts and the things that you're saying and doing, because they may not be your own ideas or compulsions. And I mean, a really quick, a good anecdote that would illustrate this, that, you know, Tom knows about. He used to have a message board forum years ago. And there was people on that forum who came forward and, you know, emailed him, or what was it? I think they emailed you, and talked about how they felt a compulsion to go after me on that forum, because I was considered one of the big contributing members of that forum, like contributing some good information and getting a lot of good conversations going. And I mean, we noticed after a while, it didn't take long to see this, it was like the whole persecution thing where people would get on the forum and just go after me. You could have 10 people in a thread saying the same thing I'm saying, but they will hone in on me and just attack me for what I said, even though it's no different than what 10 other people said. And it was really frustrating until finally some people were actually willing to admit that they felt like when they would get into the forum, this compulsion to go after me. And one guy, he actually temporarily quit the forum because it was so disturbing to him to have experienced this other force, energy, entity, whatever it was, that kind of came through him and just drove him to post something that was going after me and causing fighting and discord, which, you know, derails not only the thread, but it derails the whole positive, constructive vibe of the forum as a whole, which is something I get into in my interference article, actually, where I outline all the various examples of how you'll see interference, like true hyperdimensional interference on a day-to-day basis in your everyday life. So that was a really good example of illustrating why people need to question your urges, your ideas, your thoughts, because they may not be your own. There was also people on that forum who go after me saying very specific things, and I would point out, gee, that's really interesting because this other person said the exact same word for word thing to me on another thread. So is that really your own idea, or is that just something kind of working through you, you know? And this is happening all over. It's you know.
Just imagine Facebook now.
Yes, exactly.
I think the other thing that is huge, and it's a part of all of this, and it's a part of how they work and how they operate, is that they're trying to literally bankrupt our moral systems. And again, when I say this, there's nothing in me that is prejudiced against anything, but if you know you're one way, if you know you're heterosexual, one of the programs is to try and tweak you to get you to be bisexual, to try to get you to be the opposite of what you are. And you know, they do this trying to even hijack your sexuality, just like, you know, everybody's speaking about here, where Bernard's talking about a client who has all this creativity. They put an implant right there, so they derailed that, and it became a lower creative force being utilized for sexuality. But they want to corrupt and bankrupt our morality and our compass. And by doing so, we lose the ability to have discernment. And when we don't have discernment, then that's where they have the power. But, you know, I mean, as this talk evolves, we're going to go into where the real power is, which is within us. And this is the whole purpose of why this is what's happening on the planet, you know, Terra, because it's really us. It's really our abilities, which are likened to the abilities of Earth herself as mother, being a quantum being. We are the micro of her macro. So yeah, there's many aspects. Tom, Carissa, did you want to go into a little bit deeper into the dynamic of a hyper interdimensional day-to-day, and just so people can get a feel of what that would look like in the workplace?
One of the big ones that, you know, may be relevant to people listening to this is the way in which a lot of times, and this has happened to me, I know it's happened to you, we've heard from people whom it's happened to, people who are starting to wake up and they're seeking out educational material on these subjects will oftentimes experience interference with trying to read or listen to anything that pertains to these subjects. And that interference will take the form of various things, like all of a sudden you'll be just exhausted, tired, like you feel like you can't even read. You need to put down whatever you're trying to do and just go to sleep, you know, or you'll get scramble brain where you feel like you can't even think anymore. Like you're trying to read something and your mind is just like you were fine 10 minutes ago and now all of a sudden you literally cannot think, which can also take the form of having tones in your ears. Like just, I've had this, all of a sudden it's coupled with the scramble brain. There's literally a corresponding tone in the ear that's just like, just, and the whole thing is just creating so you can't think, you can't read, you can't even do whatever it is you're trying to do, or like with meditating as well, you're trying to meditate and that happens. Sometimes it's outright voices commanding people to go lay down and sleep or stop reading, which I've heard from people who've been trying to read my book, who contact and let me know that happened to them. And it was over and over. It was specifically when they got to part 2 of my book. They were fine up until part 2, which is where I get into my personal anecdotal experiences that really illustrate things beyond a shadow of a doubt, and which is useful. People like to read that kind of stuff. And then their mind starts going and they're, you know, oh, I had something like that happen once. And now they're really thinking on their own life and playing back their experiences and comparing to what I'm saying. So it's a very important part of the book. And so many people have had that kind of interference where one lady was printing out my book and her printer was working fine, printed the entire part 1 right up to the last page. And when it went to start printing part 2, the printer broke down. So, so that's one of the big interferences that a lot of people watching this may be able to relate to, that they may have experienced when you're trying to read websites, blogs, books, and, you know, listening to podcast, anything that relates to this, or you're trying to have some quiet meditation time, and all of a sudden it's like all hell breaks loose. You got people ringing your doorbell, knocking on your door, phones ringing, just people coming at you, anything to pull you away from what you're doing. The ear tones and the scramble brain, just all kinds of stuff. So that's one of the big ones that I can think of off the top of my head. Is there any you can come up with? Yeah,
well, just the idea of negative synchronistic interference, where whether it's people being telepathically nudged to bother you, like for example, if I'm doing important projects and I need energy and sleep to do them effectively, it's funny, the exact same day I get like 3, 4, 5 wrong numbers on my phone, and when I don't have any projects going on, I don't get anything. Like it's amazing. I mean, the probability, if you actually figure out the probability of it, is so incredibly low. And all these things will cluster in during these meaningful times that, you know. Yeah, and that's important to note too. It's the probability for any skeptics out there that would be like saying, oh, well, you know, that stuff happens. Yeah, it does, but you have to look at the probability and what are the odds that on a particular day when you're trying to do a certain thing, everything comes together. Like you have 10 different things that would otherwise normally not happen. And so it's statistical improbability that you also have to look at. Another form of interference would be... Well, I'm going to mention something that's slightly related, but it's an important topic, which is because you talked about people that are starting to wake up and the kind of obstacles that they run into. Mm-hmm. Well, this one here isn't direct, like stop what you're doing, you know, like mess up the thing you're working on, but I'm talking about disinformation agents who get sent your way in a very weird and coincidental and kind of spooky kind of way to mirror you and match you, and it really like try to build your rapport. And then hoping that once you start going in parallel with them, they can kind of deviate you along with them down this kind of paranoid, disinformational, really, really kind of
or whatever it may be. I mean, maybe they have a particular agenda they want you to promote or get in line with. So that's why they try to build that rapport and get you to kind of come with them. And they use neuro-linguistic techniques, anything they can to get you nodding your head yes and going along with them. And then all of a sudden, they try to get you. They spring that agenda and I've experienced that, people reaching out to me, trying to do that with me, and I know you've experienced.
Yeah. So if you think about someone like a really desperate, cunning salesperson being sent to you to make a deal, how would they act, right? They'd be like, "Hey, buddy, how's it going? You know, you want?" And they build this rapport, but you can tell that they're too pressured. Like, for example, when I first started researching the Matrix stuff back in 2000, 2001, specifically the idea of the Matrix control system and synchronistic manipulation, I was contacted by this woman who ended up mirroring all the things that I hadn't yet written about in an article. So all the research I was doing for the past 2 weeks, this person contacts me through a website that I had another website at the time, like a personal thing, but it wasn't linked to my Montauk site. So there's no way for this person to know what I was researching the past 2 weeks, or to be able to connect it to my, my main site. And she wrote me, mirroring back to me all the things that I had sort of been suspecting, but then putting this really strong paranoid disinformational spin on it. And she was coming on like a crazy salesperson, sending 4 or 5 emails a day, demanding a lot of time, and then just going kind of bipolar and sweet one day, crazy the next day, using emotional manipulation techniques, and until eventually I just locked her out of my life. And then she disappeared from the internet, and all the information that she previously had up it disappeared. I wasn't able to find it, so she basically disappeared from the timeline as far as as I could tell. So that was very strange, the way it came on, the way it ended. It's almost like something was edited into my reality or my timeline to try to, deviate me a certain way. But when I didn't buy it, disappeared again.
and that is profound what you just said, Tom, because I really wanted to go into that, because I do believe that they're using technology, magic technology, to insert things like that at precise moments, which I know Evie has something to say about that as well. But I would really like for us to go into that aspect of it, because I think that happens a lot more than we imagine.
By the way, I can also relate to that, what Tom just said. When I became a part of my work, some people were contacting me with all these projects and like really pampering my ego and like all this stuff. And then I saw myself looking back, also my ego kind of catching up. Oh, this person could help me, So, but something always fell off. There were the red flags. I didn't really I got to keep my integrity, keep doing what I keep doing. And then this other person, this project of it was involved, it became very controlling, telling me what I should say and not say. And I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. And then that person really pulled 180 degree from all flattery and compliments to borderline attacks and even public attacks and all this kind of stuff, because I wasn't going along with that agenda, right? So it's interesting, looking back, I can totally relate to certain instances. And it may also, what you just said, Laura, we said these entities exist out of time and space, right? Out of past, present, future. They just shuffle, shine light, intersect the way, any way they want. If we're not really are grounded in our own being, and that maybe goes later into protection, our own spiritual divine source and intuition and present moment, we can easily be just shuffled and manipulated like pawns on a chessboard.
Yeah.
Also, I just want to share a picture. This is when Evie was talking, because I think it comes from one of her files. And I also want to say that throughout history, even though the majority of it has been manipulated, much of it has been completely fabricated, and most of it has been hidden, if not destroyed. They've always left clues and sculptures. It's littered all over the planet, and it really does tell the story of this hosting type of invasive entities, whatever you want to call them, that are utilizing humanity. So I'm just going to interject while everybody talks, and occasionally I'll just put in a picture here and there, and it has to do with the story of it all. I'm also going to link a picture of the brain showing the left side and the right side, and it'll just give you words. The right side is creative, just so people have an idea of how both sides work. Because a lot of what is happening to people, even in these programs that are, they're programs that are occurring in the underground and also just across the board in brainwashing. They're utilizing this right versus left and the fracturing. And if you look at the videos and the media that are coming out and all of the music that's being pumped, it's very much splitting both.
It also ties into not only left-right brain, but also the body-mind split.
Exactly.
Technology keeps us in the cerebral mental realm. You know, porn it's all up here. Anything like information just disconnected from that body intelligence, which knows.
Like the fracturing and the splitting, which really goes back to the fundamentals of trauma-based mind control. But you add in the interdimensional aspects of entities that actually help manage, and they call it interference and handling that takes place on the interdimensional level, so that the alter personalities who have specific program behaviors or tasks are handled by the interdimensional entities. So sometimes I think that's how it all works together and why it works so well and why it's so well hidden. But the interdimensional beings themselves are the ones handling and managing a lot of this, and managing even, let's say, somebody moves in on your life, let's say it's a love bite or a dark side of Cupid setup. And then they will send somebody into your life to be your handler, but it's more on an unconscious level on their part if they haven't woken up from their programming, and it's the entity that's basically driving them to handle you. So they're acting on a lot of these unconscious compulsions that is entity driven as well as programming driven, but people don't really know the level of programming and interdimensional influence that they have until they start waking up. Which a point I wanted to make too is I had somebody correspond with me who knew that they had reptilian attachments or that type of energy because it entered on the back, which was like that image where the entity was on the back and the human body's here and he's on the back and he's linking in the back heart area. But it came in his life. He was kind of born in with it, but he knew it was present. So he worked very, very hard for many, many years to clear himself and finally rid himself of these entities, this reptilian. And he said that it was a distinct difference afterwards, that a lot of the thoughts he had were changed, that he no longer had the paranoia and the fear and the things that he always thought were actually his own, but they weren't really his own. They were the entity as much, you know? So that tells you that when you do remove yourself, when you clear yourself, that you start to realize what is you and what is not you. But sometimes you only know after this thing is removed or after you do your healing and clearing work.
And if you look at that sculpture, you see that the large reptilian was holding something in his hand while he was invading the body of the man. And what he's holding in his hand is, people think that it's the soul. So
well, there does seem to be a dichotomy at work where the cultural, societal programming is intended to keep us in our head, keep us in our mental headspace, keep us in our mind, yet at the same time disembody us, disconnect us from physical body, which speaks its own language, which has its own form of communication, which we interact with ideally in a holistic fashion. A lot of the parasitic beings, and there really is something to this notion of a hive mind parasite virus. People liken it to an infection. Some of my German call the subjector. This infection which corrodes and corrupts us from within. On the macro scale, we can see major inroads where the mass media, academia, etc. We talked about the normalization of porn earlier. Now they're pushing the normalization of pedophilia, of transgenderism, and so on and so forth. They're likening pedophilia to orientation, personal choice. Never neglecting the fact that the children don't have a choice in this matter. So on the one hand, keeping us in our mental headspace and filling us with all these mathematical equations and shaming us into conforming and being like everyone else. On the other hand, these entities are making inroads into our physical being, because they're really into state experiences. For example, in the sexual realm, when someone has been subjected to this hive mind paralysis, they not only can become addicted to sex, addicted to porn, but if these entities develop what I call a full interface with the individual, then it could start, the sexuality deviates into other forms of expression, which again, I'm not passing value judgments here. It could delve into things like sadomasochism, bondage and discipline, cross-dressing, but again, it's of a sensate nature. They want to feel more aroused, so they wear the clothing, the apparel of the other gender. They want to feel more, so they to bondage and discipline, sadomasochism, but that's what they're telling themselves. It's the entity that is utilizing the human body as a medium to interact with our 3D realm. So by taking over this person, interfacing with them, it begins to feel and say pleasures, and the pleasures, because it doesn't really have to live in the body, it feels on a visceral level the pleasure aspect, the highs and lows of emotion. This also dovetails into the drug addictions and the substance abuse addictions, which tied into sexual addictions, because again, it's a sensate nature. If a person hasn't worked through these issues, if they haven't gone through enough healing, we find this a commonality with many unhealed people. Not all, but certainly a certain segment, is they can't stand to be in their own skin, stand to be alone. Because when they're alone and they have time to ponder, what happens is the OCD thought loops of despair, worth kick in. So they have to mask that, whether it be substance abuse, whether it be one form of addiction or another, addiction with digital devices, iPhones, laptops, whatever the case may be. All those things tend to feed this addiction cycle, and it allows these entities to further interface and further develop strongholds within these people, because it wants to have this sensate feeling of being able to not only feel within the person and direct the person's feelings and emotions, but influence them. And by doing so, it will start pushing them and guiding them into scenarios and situations where even more emotions and more of these sensate experiences can transpire. So that goes back to the whole concept of a mental headspace devoid of emotion, devoid of connection with our physical body and our being. But on the other hand, enemy kicks in, it allows these entities to work through us and feel through us. And it always wants to feel, these archontic entities, the extremes of emotion. And we see this with psychologically and physically abusive males, where it's like, as long as they can outbreed the woman in our example, in a psychologically abusive sense, as long as they can hold their breath longer and get out another cutting jibe, another cutting, humorous to them, cutting statement, insulting, insult at the expense of the woman, feeding not only off the egotistical, narcissistic rush of being in a position of power, but it's also feeding off the fear and the disorientation, the confusion and the anxiety of the woman. It's feeding off of all of it. And so what we're seeing now is, and has been for some time, is the macro is merging the micro. And this is where people really need to wake up and recognize that the entertainment industry, academia, that's promoting these.
Well, while he's off, I just wanted to mention, we could probably start bringing up the personality disordered behavior that represents some of the hosting and what do you call organic portal kind of situations going on, but also how the micro and the individual sense in terms of healing from, let's say, narcissistic abuse or a dark side of Cupid relationship is actually a model of what we can take out into the world on a larger scale, so that the recovery you know, how would we recover this in a personal situation with a bad relationship or situation? And then that would be like narcissistic abuse recovery modalities or clearings and entity detachment, no contact, and being able to recognize when you're confronted with the narcissistic, psychopathic, borderline behaviors and all those masks, really.
But you know what I wanted to just comment on what James said was really important, is reminding me of something, how he talks how these entities really literally like basically try to feed through us, right? Just get this luge. And from a macro perspective, what we're seeing now, the agenda from a macro perspective, if they're going to be able to succeed or not is irrelevant, but is to, you know, we are in this time of transition, this quote unquote shift, right? Which is a long period of time as Earth is going up to a higher state, or as humanity, you know, shifting into 4th density or 5D or whatever model you use. So their agenda is really to prime our bodies in whatever way to be used as incarnational opportunities to fully possess us. That's really what it comes down to. That's why we see now with the rise of, you know, technology, AI, nanotechnology, all this stuff, GMOs, all the stuff we are putting poison with. It's not just to keep us dumb, obviously, but to also keep us disembodied. You know, that's why I'm so big on embodiment, disembodied, that body-mind split, the soul not fully integrated, because for that quote-unquote awakening and process to ascend to a higher state, we need to, it happens through the body. The body is our vehicle, and the soul needs to be fully anchored, you know, and that's how we protect ourselves from all intrusion. You can only embody and fully anchor the soul if you have cleared the vessel of any stuff, any shadow stuff, any conditioning, any of that, and to really then connect to spirit, to your own inner divinity. And that's where the protection happens. But again, on a macro level, that's really what they are gearing towards, what they're working towards, of, you know, full possession on a global level.
I'm so glad you brought that up. It's totally true. And that's what Malanga found in his studies of the abductions, how the aliens parasited us and lived through us through this parasitization and, you know, distortion of our perception and feeding on the energy, and how over time they want to hybridize so that once their parasite is there, they're able to express these hybrid genetics until the quote, the spirit, the higher self, is completely enslaved by the program of the parasite and the program of the alien in a genetically modified body that has more difficulty connecting with that higher consciousness. And people have it mixed up. They think they're being upgraded by these benevolent beings, but I think it's more of the opposite, and that there's I see a lack of discernment in terms of being able to do a simple diagnostic assessment of MK Ultra mind control programming, or even muscle testing for any entities that are overriding, let's say, the spirit of the person, the higher self of the person. But I don't think this is being done in a lot of the more positive ET contact kinds of research. And I'm not saying that it's all negative. It's just that I think there's a lack of discernment and being able to quantitatively just being able to tell what's even present. And you can do that with more of the body oriented, like kinesiology, muscle testing. But I don't know if I'm getting off topic from where you wanted to go. But
James didn't finish talking, but I do want to go back into what the personality disorder aspect of all of this, these infections and what they bring in people, and also on the other hand, what Bernard is saying, because they are priming the body for this artificial takeover and hybridization, so that the soul will be split and full possession can happen, because then they will be embodied. All of these non-bodied entities will have a new hybrid species in body, which is part of why the GMO is all these Frankensteinian, it is altering us in a very anti-life way, which is
it's also setting the stage. Oh, go ahead.
No, I want you to finish, James, because you got like.
Yeah, it's not just what's happening here, where in this rapidly increasing frequency-wise 3D realm we're in, because in this flux state, a number of things could happen where this is why the powers that be, the archontic forces working through their hybridized minions on the surface, are pulling out all the stops now. It's not only they can ultimately turn us all into drones, non-thinking, robotic drones. This is very common when we're talking about process too, where when the entity has developed the full interface within the host human, they have to learn how to act like a human, which is why they at times themselves in a robotic fashion. They have to understand how to like open a bank account. They have to understand how to interact with a waitress. This is like all new to them. They've only been from a parasitic level. Now they're working through the person's body and having to guide, the individual and look convincing. But I do believe, and this could be the subject of a whole nother segment, is a really deep issue that dovetails into the MO fluoride vaccination issue, is the reincarnational soul harvesting aspect. Because if humanity allows itself to be dumbed down to the extent where they're stuck in physical embodiment, and yet paradoxically at the same time, stuck in this headspace full of indoctrination, full of dogmas, full of lies, that will set the stage for soul reincarnation, soul harvesting, so on and so forth. So it's not just what's happening here on the surface in linear time we have to deal with in order to break this paradigm that we find themselves in. It's going a step further. It's the end game that these quantic entities have in mind. It's more than just what's going to happen on this planet and on the surface and 3D physical embodiment. They want to maintain the cycle of harvesting and reincarnation in perpetuity forever. They want endlessly recycled over and over and over. So that's something that must be taken into account.
Not to mention the multi-worlds that they've created and the parallel world and the astral worlds that are associated with how they are rigging our psyche and our metaphysical quantum metabodies, because this will have to be another topic, because that is really what's happening. It is multiple thing. It's a multiple world dimensional reality occurrence of really, I think, the entire universe.
Yeah.
Yes, it's the entire plane that's being affected.
Maybe we'll bring it back because that's literally a whole segment on its own.
Yeah.
Bring it back to what you said before. Let's go to borderline personality narcissism, like the personality disorders and psychological pathologies in light of hyperdimensional, and then protection and help in order to move through it.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to start on that because I see that there's small scale things that could lead up to bigger vulnerabilities to, let's say, infection and possible possession and all that. But it really starts with a lot of our own wounding and splitting, dissociation and traumas, where there's unhealed wounds or trapped emotional energies and false beliefs that have been linked in with some kinds of traumas, as well as entities or interdimensionals that can come in at the time of trauma, because they often do come in at times of trauma. So if we have unresolved things, they can maybe mask as something as simple as codependent kinds of behaviors, where they have a psychological defense and different kinds of coping mechanisms or behaviors, or what we call psychological defenses, that actually put a mask on them, and maybe they have a type of addictive or compulsive behaviors that are always acting in ways to prevent them from having the feelings that are deep inside that correspond to the earlier traumas or issues that cause them pain. And so they're living in this mask, this psychological defense mask, which compels them to certain behaviors which tend towards addictions, tend toward controlling and distorting the reality in order to maintain their defense system. Or they may have full-on dissociation or a full-on personality disorder, which is more, what they call it, pervasive, and it actually is more explicit in terms of dysfunctional behaviors, as opposed to, let's say, a simple codependent who just has anxiety and certain tendencies. But we see a lot of the more dramatic behaviors of, let's say, hosting and parasitism and interdimensional interference through what I call the personality disordered people who have massive unhealed wounds and are operating on huge psychological defenses and masks, as well as entities. So the borderline personality disorder in particular tends to be the one that is really the one that can cause a lot of damage to people in relationships. And even in my book, The Dark Side of Cupid, many of the people who had, let's say, the more dysfunctional partners that were more energy vampires, like the severe ones, tended to be the narcissistic, psychopathic, sociopathic type, but sometimes it was the borderline type. So that's something that needs to be addressed, because that's where you can identify it as well as know, let's say, the reasons why it became that way. So maybe Laura can just kind of chime in on that aspect.
Yeah, what because this is such a deep area, which I love. I love this area. I find it fascinating. What I find is the false shadow personality is protected by the narcissist. So they create this narcissistic mask to cover and hide the actual false personality. So it's like a double. It's a double hiding. So you've got the real injured, wounded child buried in there somewhere, but they're so disconnected from all of their core wounds that they're literally functioning on comorbidity, which are many layers of masks, all of which have different personalities, all of which are personality disorders. That's why you always will have, like, the thing that a person will see the most and at foremost will be the narcissism, but in actuality, the borderline typically is what drives the narcissism, and the narcissism is the protector that comes in. Then you have the you've got the manic phases in association with their triggers. So as soon as they're triggered, they won't ever get to the point where they're even connecting to their core wounds, because they're so disconnected they can't describe what they're feeling. But what covers it is the rage or the punishment. It's demeaning you, it's verbally abusing you, it's trying to find your core wounds and pulling them to the surface and twisting your core wounds right inside there and making it out, projecting it onto you.
Yeah.
So it is fascinating, the cycle that happens of this type of abuse, and especially when they have all of, they're easy prey for these forces to come in and utilize them. That's the thing, they are some of the best prey for them. And they are usually and typically very intelligent, very charismatic. They have gifts, but it's so dangerous. Their intelligence is so dangerous. They will use their sexuality. They will use what they know you are tuning into. And they're empathic enough and psychic enough, too. This is the other weird thing about this dynamic. Typically speaking, these people have psychic ability. So they will tune right into you, and they will know exactly what you want, and they'll mirror that. But often, too, they'll mirror what you are to you.
Yes.
Because they're empty, and they're functioning on a false personality, shadow personality disorders constantly, and all these masks protecting themselves and all these altars. So in essence, they're empty. They feel empty, and they will say to you in a moment of weakness, I feel empty. But what they do is they'll mirror you to you, but you don't know it. So you're falling in love with you, or you're falling into what you're seeing as yourself, but you're not able to recognize it. But they can't sustain that for too long. And this is when they start manipulating and meddling. And this is when they start weaving and twisting. So the second that their facade starts shaking down and breaking, that's when they'll like twist it, suddenly create chaos, suddenly create trauma and drama, so that they can make it about you. They can make it about it being your fault, you cause this, and derail the whole thing so that you no longer are focusing in on what's really going on.
And extremely befuddling, like
And
kind of confusing.
in their reality, just when you're getting it, they just do this incredible twist, but they can actually get you in this cycle for a long time. They can victimize you and keep you trapped for a really long time because they have all of these other, quote, your gifts. They're like using your gifts against you. And you're, and in the end, I mean, you can, I mean, not, I'm not saying, I'm not advocating to play with these people at all. I don't mean that, but I've actually done experiments where I have gone out of my way to not react, but react in different ways. I've gone out of my way to just project and mirror back to them what they are. And I refused to give them what they wanted to engage with, which was me, or whatever my traits are. And the result is very interesting when you persist. One of the things that they can't stand is if you ignore them as well, right? They'll love anything. They will love it if you get violent on them even, but they just can't handle if you just pretend like they don't exist.
In fact, Laura, what I wanted to say was, in my own experience, and this is something I put in one of my articles about, is called The Hidden Puppet Masters, where I talk about the borderline subject. But the whole thing about the anger, what I've kind of noticed, it's like, in my experience, dealing with a borderline mother, you could, like, first off, you could see the force that was operating through it. You know, you could see when the eyes changed, the face. I call it the glint in the eyes, and you know, it's like a glassy, glinty eye thing, and the predatorial smirk. And it was like the whole goal was to try to get me to react and to lose my shit, and just. Yeah, you know, and then it's like standing back with that self-satisfied smirk, like that's all they want. It's like trying to feed off the energy, and they don't care how they get there. They don't even care what it is that you're mad about. It's just as long as they're dragging you down and derailing you, getting you to just be your lowest, worst version of yourself and give up that energy. And you know, that's all they care about in my experience.
They want you and trap you in their game. That's really what it comes down to.
And what you said about the ignoring is so
that 0 point consciousness, that's really what comes down to protection, to not engage in this interpersonal fighting and give them that food. And also keeping in mind that this person, and by the way, Laura, that clicked so much for me, the mask of a mask. I'm like, yes, this makes so much, like, duh, actually. That they are not conscious of it. You know, in light of the hyperdimensional topics, they are driven or triggered by these entities to try to get the loosh, so them trying to trigger us in this interpersonal fighting. Mm-hmm. So that's the main, you know, on this, from a microcosmic level, you know, protection and energy conservation. It's about non-engagement, of really having that boundary and being non-reactive, which is very, very difficult, and not taking it personal, and also at the same time taking responsibility, because the only way they can get to you is, like Laura said before, at your own wounds, because that's what they target. So if you get yourself the victim consciousness or blame or feel like, oh my God, this horrible other person, and make it personal, they win. This is what they want, to really engage into that interpersonal.
They want you to be a victim. I mean, they want to encourage the victim consciousness, which is why I think a lot of people who are whining about being a targeted individual, I mean, things are definitely happening, but they're falling into the victim card by making these assumptions that, well, this is all technology, therefore I can do nothing about it, and they're doing this to me, yes, but, and really, we do have a better degree of control than I think we're led to believe, because of the marginalization of our own personal power, as well as the marginalization of the value of healing and recovery, and what it really means to do one's personal healing work. And even those careers and those kinds of things in society or even in education are completely spun to be something else than what they really are, or they're marginalized, so they're really not as valuable. It's like, well, it's really not as valuable to be, let's say, a teacher as opposed to an aerospace engineer, or a scientist who's more scientific and left brain. Well, they're going to get paid more, they're going to be more valued, and they're going to be more believed in the media because they have scientific evidence, whereas somebody who's, let's say, a therapist or a healer who is more of a right brain functioning person, they're just going to be marginalized and devalued. Therefore, that work is not taken seriously. But the trouble is our power, our personal power, and everything about defeating all these issues has to do with being more in the healing modality of taking personal responsibility and very much valuing what we're doing. How to create solutions is something that's more simple than I think what people realize.
Well, and
and it's also how people to this externally created archontic manipulation. And this is where awareness, heightened awareness, situation awareness comes in. Whereas, and I'm not, piling on people who consider themselves targeted individuals, because they do get malleted, okay? But the difference is with when one has a heightened sense of awareness, whenever the matrix sentinel, and a matrix sentinel could be a person, an individual, a perfect stranger, ghost in the machine, electronic crap, whatever the case may be, people, oh, it's that again, right? I'm going to make a cup of coffee. It doesn't engender the desired response out of us. Like, we don't panic mode. I've got to write this paper, and now my computer is not working, right? So, and also, when we recognize these manifestations, these matrix sentinels in all of their forms, we just kind of like navigate around it. We kind of like, we bounce off of around it. We don't confront it head on, and we don't create that feedback loop of fear and paranoia and whatnot. Recently, someone very close to me had an incident when there were literally 3 men in black in a van outside her house. And this was the second or third time she'd seen these men in black in van types. And what was interesting was she had the impression that they were human. And what was interesting was she took digital photographs with her mobile phone camera. And then when we looked later on, we only saw the van. When she knew that there were 3 guys, men in black outfits, dark sunglasses, the whole bit, along outside of the van, as because they intuitively knew when she looked out her window. And in the moment she looked out the window, and then they tuned into that, oh, here she comes. And then they were very blatant about slowly moving further down the street. But again, what was interesting, out of the 2 photographs that were taken, there were no people that were seen outside of the van. Me, that either they were using some kind of masking technology, or there were maybe perhaps even reptilian shapeshifters that were visible to the naked eye, but for whatever reason they were able to energetically change the field, if you will, so they wouldn't show up in the picture. Some people would experience something like that and really go into fear, panic mode. Oh my God, I just took a picture of shifting reptilians. They were there. They didn't show up in the picture. They were walking right alongside the van. But for the person, she just took it in stride. It was like water off a duck's back. This is the kind of thing that happens to people like us, right? She didn't feed into it. Like us, when we feel a presence, when we're laying there at night, and we definitely feel a presence in this or the other side of the room, okay, acknowledge there. You're not getting the jump on me because I have my own protection. And eventually, when they can't get that fear response, when they can't get that paranoia response, go away. Now, if they really make a nuisance of themselves, and they try to instill some paralysis, whatever the case may be, I fight it. We break the paralysis. Okay, you're going to play that game. I wanted a cup of coffee anyway. I wanted to read anyway. Turn the light on, right? Sing. there are things that we could do that does not enmesh us further into this targeted individual victim mindset. We be like cosmic veterans. That's what I call it. We're veterans of the cosmic wars. A lot of us have, quite frankly, this is not our first barbecue. We've gone paradigm busting, frequency busting gig before in previous incarnations, either here or in other worlds. So when we recognize these matrix sentinel nations, we take it in stride. We don't allow it to get a rise out of us. Honestly, I get more worked up emotionally watching a sporting event when I see it being made in a baseball game or something, right? I mean, that in itself is feeding into this matrix simulation, but it's something that quickly passes. As far as these manifestations of this archontic influence, they only get out of me what I give to them. And my emotions, my feelings, my very spirit is precious to me. And so when we get around people like us that take these kinds of things in stride, what happens a lot of times is these entities will look for easier prey. They'll just, well, we'll try him later, right? And let's go mess with this other person because we may rise out of them. So there's a lot to be said for heightened awareness and how we react, or more to the point, not react in a way that's detrimental to us.
I wanted to interject something here along what James is saying, because when he's talking about the lack of fear, the lack of paranoia, and how it doesn't give them anything to work with, and they have to move it on to somebody else. I mean, that's definitely something I've discovered for myself, and like kind of wish I could just scream from the rooftops. So I'm really glad to hear you saying that there are people out there who figured this out, because it's very, very true. And I just hope everyone listening to this really takes in what James just said. And the other interesting point that I want to add to that is that that leads to the idea of the realm breaching thing, how this stuff can gain a foothold in your reality, because it doesn't go from zero to all out madness overnight, where you don't have any of this in your life and then all of a sudden it's like a 3-ring circus of crazy woo-woo. It's something that it starts small, and then your reactions, like negative reactions with fear, paranoia, terror, anger, any of that kind of stuff, just responding to it in a negative way gives it something to work with. It's something it can latch onto. It knows it's getting that response from you. And then it's also a form of giving it permission. It's almost a form of, yes, you have the permission to terrorize me. And a lot of people don't realize or see it that way. And I didn't view it that way many years ago when it was happening to me, but I realized looking back at it, I understand now about the idea of the permissions thing. But when you buy into it and you get scared and paranoid, you're giving it a form of permission. You're giving it something to latch onto. And now it can go a step further. It's got its mitts kind of like in you, and now it can do more. And then you respond again with fear and paranoia and anger or whatever, and now it can go, and it just keeps more and more and more, and it just builds and builds and builds. And I think that's what's happened to a lot of people who think that they're targeted individuals. They may very well have some things happening, whether it's physical-based people groups, which a lot of these people believe that's what's going on. I don't know about that. I mean, I think it can happen, but, or it's hyperdimensional targeting. It starts with something that gets its mitts in them, and then they respond to it, gives permission, gives stuff something to work with, and then it just builds, and then it just becomes this thing where it's creating a feedback loop, and then it just becomes just completely out of control, and then their whole life just starts spinning wildly out of control and going off the rails. And I've heard from just so many people emailing me over the years who are having all the wrong reactions to this stuff, and they're just allowing it to just take over their life. And I just wish more people could realize everything that James just said. So.
Yeah, and also at the same time creating what I said before, these thought forms which become entities by this constant focus of, oh my God, something is attacking me, and like, oh my God, what am I going to do? And like, even I feel just on a basic trap of agreement or free will manipulation level, once you feed into that frequency of fear, it's almost like an agreement. Okay, it's a match. And like you said before, they're very mechanical. They're not creative. Like, okay, he or she is responding to the text. They're reacting exactly how they want to, so we can get more loosh. It's very mechanical.
Yes.
It's not, it's not like they're like that creative.
Right. They're getting the response. It's very robotic. It really is. I don't know what these things are, but they're very two-dimensional.
But I just want to say one thing very quick, which reminds me of what James talked about, which I had on my bulletin point, which also ties into the hyperdimensional intrusion in the so-called truth movement, which I see a lot, especially in this day and age, especially very, truth movement. I don't like the word anyway. I don't know if there's a movement, but I see like this, there are amazing researchers out there but only focus on the 3D aspect of reality, who have huge followings, but also so many of these very popular and prolific people out there are not really engaged in any self-work and lacking emotional intelligence and have this amazing intellect and mental information, but they engage in infights and, projecting their own shadow into others and all this friction. It's like this whole divide and conquer thing within people of this so-called truth movement is exactly what these entities feed off of as well, right? So it just affects so many people, like even well-meaning activists, right? Who engage into like trying to save the world and like pushing information on others and all of this, which just works in favors of these entities who just feed off of that friction.
And I wanted to say something, because when we talk about people with personality disorders, and we discuss the fact that they are easy prey to be hosted and possessed and utilized, because they're being utilized to attack other targets, essentially. But what I want to say is that I don't want to pit them as being bad because they're fractured, they're wounded. Really, I just want to discuss the dynamic of this all with personality disorders, but not in a way that we criticize them, because many will do the work. But what I'm finding is many of them, with knowledge about MyLabbing, with knowledge about clones, with knowledge about setups, with knowledge about everything that is occurring with AI and TI's targeting interference, what I'm finding is a pattern that they're using that as excuses often, so that they don't do their own personal work. So this is, and they're very intelligent about it. So they already have the arsenal that they need to defend themselves and not really take responsibility. And I think that's a really huge red flag when you see that. When you see a person who's, giving you a list of the reasons why. Now it's because of their MyLab. Now it's because they're targeted individuals. Now it's because this has happened and they have a setup, a family setup. And they've been wounded in such a way, they've been emotionally incested, which is something we should discuss, because many of these personality disordered people originate in a setup where there's covert emotional incest. And there's always something of that nature, because this is also within relation to the reptilian traits. These are all reptilian trait symptoms, which is what they exhibit. The other thing is when you do feel that really uncomfortable feeling inside that is like a fluttering, and it's like your fear response, and you don't understand it, and you might be having two extremes occurring at the same time. You might be feeling a sense of euphoria with them, or like you really like them, or you like something about them, but at the same time you're feeling this unsettled fear inside, in that stomach fear. Pay attention to that. Don't pay attention to the euphoria. Don't pay attention to the front woo-woo. Pay attention to the inner
I learned it the hard way too.
That's the Alien Love Bite classic, where there's that.
Yeah. Should we take a?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's take a little break. So, break it in.
I guess one of the big points that I, would hope listeners can take away from this is the role of personal frequency and the power of our own minds, which most people are completely unaware of. This is something we were talking about on our break, which is how we're not exactly given an instruction manual when we incarnate here. So we don't even fully understand who we are and what we're capable of, let alone what this place really is and how it operates and what's really going on here. But that is one of the big things, is the power of our own mind and the role of our own personal frequency in terms of shaping our realities. And these things that are being used against us to not only hijack our own individual lives, but also the collective timeline. So when I'm talking about the role of personal frequency, it's kind of like what I was mentioning earlier in terms of realm breaching and how these things don't go from just zero to all out madness overnight. It starts small. They do something, a couple things here and a couple things there, and our negative reactions to it, and not trying to shut it down, and knowing our own power and pushing back against it, because we, again, we don't even know these things. We have to figure it out the hard way, usually from trial and error, but we don't even know. And then we allow it to just keep doing stuff to us and having a fearful reaction. It gives it permission, allows it to just keep happening. And then that's how it gains a foothold. And next thing you know, that's where things are just going out of control in our lives in terms of the woo-woo, as I like to call it. And people's lives start to get derailed. And that's how this interference can happen on an individual level, with people being targeted in that kind of way. So, there is such thing as we have the ability for manifestation and reality creation, which again, people don't realize a lot of the times. And once this thing kind of gains a foothold into our reality, we start to give it more power than it really deserves. And we're putting all our focus on it. And that kind of ties into a point that Bernhard had mentioned in terms of the thought loops that we ourselves can start to create, like almost like they're like entities in a way that are kind of is like.
Well, see, what generally tends to happen is that emotional energy that you project and that you hold in your subconscious, it ends up having this reality creation effect. So your own mind and the own energies that you project outward start influencing the probability of your experiences. So in a sense, it's almost like you have a role as a broadcaster of the life experiences that come to you to some degree. I mean, it's not like 100% of everything that you experience is solely generated by you. I'm just saying that it can be, magnetically influenced in a way, I guess you could say, through the whole law of attraction and all that. But the dark side of the law of attraction is that if your subconscious can be polluted with negative programming or paranoid thought loops, for example, then, or if these entities can build up a sufficient level of interface with your thoughts and your emotions and your body, then they can start broadcasting into your reality through your own thoughts and your own emotions and energies. And how that actually ends up working in real life, for example, would be with some of these cases of targeted individuals where they have a very strong paranoid emotional energy that they're emitting, in addition to having, repetitive obsessive thought loops, concerning, being victimized, and that, every single little thing that happens is part of the whole control system trying to bring them down. But they're actually affecting the probability of what happens to them in life. They actually start creating a lot of these weird events. And then the more they do this, the more weird and improbable these events become, until it's no longer just, let's say, I don't know, like a neighbor coughing at an inopportune time to, somehow mimic you, like confirm some thought in your, these weird type paranoid thoughts that they have.
Yeah.
It goes from that little tiny bit level to something that's extremely weird, like entities coming through their walls and knocking on ceilings. And I mean, I hear lots of stories about people like hearing like basically aliens or some sort of entities like running on their roof, knocking sounds or coming through the walls, or torturing them all night long. They use that word torture a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Poking them, electrical sensations, and all the way down to astral rape scenarios and so on, which is quite common actually. And all that stuff there, it tends to be, like Carissa said, it doesn't just happen overnight.
Yeah.
It's a build-up process through a gradual reinvestment of the energy that you project, which feeds them, which makes them stronger, which gives them a stronger foothold in your reality. They then in turn can do more things to you. And if you choose at some level to and keep engaging in it, then they become stronger, you become more fearful, they become stronger, you become more fearful. And by the end, a lot of these people, they have psychotic breaks, they end up in mental institutions,
Mm-hmm.
homeless, their lives destroyed because they've suspected everyone that could possibly help them as being a hybrid or as being one of the...
Everybody's in on it, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, so it ends up mimicking paranoid schizophrenia, even if the person doesn't have a family history of
Right.
schizophrenia.
They're not actually schizophrenic, but
Yeah.
they start mimicking it. I've seen that a lot with people who've emailed me. And one of the things that I had happen years ago, like this stuff was happening, and this is what I talk about in part 2 of my book. I call it the sidetrack circus diversion, fear and paranoia generators. And so this stuff starts happening, it's getting worse and worse and worse. My response to it back then, I wasn't like terrorized by it and I wasn't victimized. It was kind of along the lines of what James described earlier of that friend and what he was describing of her non-reaction to those men in black not showing up on the digital image. I was kind of always just like, yeah, but yeah, there was some fear, but it overall was kind of nonchalant. And I was just mainly coasting in neutral. So I wasn't super scared and worked up, but there was a little bit of fear and just a whole lot of non-action. And I've described on my website, I think that kind of lack of fear and non-action kind of really did help to keep things from escalating more rapidly than they did, and it kind of did help to keep things at bay. However, because I wasn't doing anything to try to stop it, that's why it did keep invading my reality. And not until I gained awareness of the fear frequency, and I was literally told, it was brought to my attention, and I talk about this in my Higher Self article, that there really was a man behind the curtain, so to speak, that was causing all this stuff in my reality to try to keep me scared all the time. That was the quote. And once I learned that it just it lost all its power. It just overnight, it just evaporated. I could just no longer feel scared about it or have any kind of reaction, and it just completely blew it off, like, oh, get out of here. I mean, seriously. And then I could actually start to take active measures to push back at it instead of just being inert and not doing anything. And that's when it basically kind of stopped. So what was going on in my life back in 2002 and 3 and into early 2004 is no longer overtly happening in my reality right now. All of that stuff is gone, from black helicopters, literally hovering on top of my apartment, the phones being tapped, stuff having come into my apartment while I was at work and messing with things so I would know that stuff was there. All of that stuff just stopped. And, there's because I had nothing to work with anymore. I lost all the fear, and then actively started kind of rising up and knowing my own power and pushing back against it. So it stopped. I had to move on to somebody else. But, unfortunately, most people don't know this. That's what I was trying to say earlier. We're not given an instruction manual. People come here, they don't even realize, they don't understand how things work, what the rules are, what the power of their own mind is capable of. And, how much we're reality creating here. Everything from mundane, stupid stuff onto the big stuff. And then how the entire human species as a collective, we're reality creating for the entire planet. And that's how, it's also interfering on the macrocosm level with the whole world. And some of the things that it's utilizing for that is the mass media and the entertainment industry and all the ways that they're kind of hijacking our minds to get in and start reality creating something that's in their best interest, which is affecting the entire timeline. So
Yeah, so they're just polluting our minds and our belief systems with false thoughts, false ideals, in order to create basically a false future that's not part of our destiny. That seems to be what they're going for. It's because it seems that we, for the most part, are we are the pivot points on the timeline. Okay, so if they want to change the timeline, they have to go through us without us necessarily knowing it. At a superficial conscious level,
because they actually don't have as much power as they would like you to think. So I mean, we're like, I think Laura mentioned this earlier, like we actually have the power, and they need that, so they have to kind of work through us. I mean, they're very limited in what they can actually do.
Yeah, it's because we are here in physicality in this timeline. We are the ones that have the final say in a way, and that's why they resort to all these subtle, cunning, behind using little backdoor exploits in order to affect these changes. It's because it's almost like they're behind a glass window and they can only tap, So how much can a person influence? That's that sort of thing. So that's why they work through our subconscious, through these subtle manipulation tactics. And that's why they look for these organic portals or these empty humans who don't have a spirit within them, or enough of a spirit to resist, to kind of shut that out. So if you imagine, like in chemistry labs, they got these glass chambers with gloves built into the walls, and a person can stick their hand through the gloves and interact with whatever's inside. Well, in a way, those gloves are these empty people. And we are here inside this chamber, and these entities are outside of it, trying to influence what happens here. And, you know, the problem is the more we, as a collective, align with them, allow them into our minds and into our lives, the more these two realities begin to merge. So the more tangible they become, and the lower in vibration we become like them, you see. And I think that seems to be the ultimate point, which kind of goes back to the whole hybrid breeding program, altering our genetics, combining that with what Bernhard said about the disembodiement, the split between the mind and the body, so that we kind of check out, something else can come in. And it's essentially an invasion of one reality into another, okay, or one reality by another. That seems to be what's going on. So yeah, it's a pretty serious thing, but it all hinges on what your own free will reactions are to these manipulations.
Right. And if I was able to like shut it down, like what was happening to me 10 years ago, it means I don't feel like it's just me and I'm somehow special. I really believe everybody has that ability. I mean, you know, if anything's trying to invade your reality, you have the ability to shut it down. I mean, just say, you know, sounds corny, just say no. But really, I mean, you know, you exert your free will, which a lot of people don't do. So we have that ability. And if the whole collective could know to do that on a mass scale, I mean, and start resisting all the stuff that's being perpetrated upon us, could, you know, ultimately affect the entire direction of the plan and the whole timeline itself. But that would require mass awakening.
Yeah, if you think about how these entities use feedback loops, you know, where they induce a fear response in you and then you in turn feed them and they become stronger and so on. Well, you could turn that around and you could create a positive feedback loop where by your own free will, and actually what free will really boils down to, it boils down to acting in spite of current conditions rather than because of current conditions. Okay, so if you act because of the past, then you're just perpetuating the past and you're just repeating patterns, right? So that's basically what a computer or a machine does. It just takes inputs from the past and, you know, progresses itself forward in time. And we don't want to be machines. We want to be humans with spirits, you know, with living forces of free will. So what that requires then is choosing what you want for a future. Mm-hmm. You know, do you want to have a positive future? Do you want to grow as a spirit? Do you want to manifest? You know, do you want to realize your potential? And if yes, then you can't use current conditions and what these entities are doing as an excuse to stay stuck. Okay, and that's what a lot of these targeted individuals and the whole victim mindset, that seems to be what they're falling for, is saying, I have no power because this is happening. No, what you have to do is say, because this is happening, I'm going to put a stop to it. I want something different. So I'm going to create a new positive feedback loop where I'm going to take mental actions, physical actions, emotional actions, you know, occult actions, which basically means just, you know, things like canceling agreements, which is a whole subject in itself, in order to generate positive events, which then make you more positive, which then create more positive events. And that then, if you were to do it, you know, on a wide enough scale, would spawn an entirely new positive future, which I guess might be the actual true future that we should be going into, right?
Yeah, and I also wanted to add this is kind of relating to the target individuals. I've heard of from many of them over the years via email. And the big thing that they all have in common is a hypersensitivity. They really, really care about, you know, what everybody thinks and the fact that people are supposedly talking about them. And what I'm always advising people is you have to stop caring. Who gives a shit? If someone wants to talk about you, great, let them. Who cares what they're thinking? You know, who cares? I mean, you just have to stop caring. I mean, and that's another route in is that hypersensitivity, really, you know, caring, and being self-conscious in that kind of way. And you just have to stop caring. And then, you know, it loses its power. I mean,
well, yeah, you have to stop caring about the things that only have power because you care about them.
Yeah, exactly. It's a good way.
And that's huge, because I think the people that are hypersensitive to that degree, it's based on their own conditioning of shame and guilt, abandonment, rejection.
Yes.
And really, if they stop long enough to think about why they're so hypersensitive to everybody else's response, basically it's a mirror of themselves for their own rejection of themselves.
Yeah.
And it also says they haven't done the work and they haven't taken responsibility and they're still putting the blame on everybody else. But I think one of the other aspects to this whole thing where we take back what is ours, and that's the entire universe, is that we have to be vocal about what we don't agree with, and we can't just be quiet, because omission is agreement. So your silence is a form of an acceptance to everything. And people have to start understanding and comprehending that they need to literally, just as much as we're a body here, but we're meta body, we're meta being. So just as much as we're meta, we're body. That means that we have to actually use the body, aka be vocal and literally not agree with this whole thing, because the powers that are in operation on the physical here, let's just say the illuminated ones, okay? And I can't stand the word Illuminati because I don't think that's what they're called. But let's just say the illuminated ones, they're illuminated because they know that they can get the entire planet to do everything without having any guilt and any karma, because you know what? They haven't done it. Their hands are clean. They know the rules of the game. So they set up a war, but they won't go in the war, but they set it up so everybody else will fight it and they're scot-free. This is how they operate. This is how they've operated. So all they need is our silence, and all they need is for us to just accept what they give us, including that means music, media, that means what you read in the newspaper, that means you accepting normal day-to-day things. Like I challenge everything and everyone, bank, everything. And I make it vocal and I'm very verbal about not agreeing. And even since, I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, but even the whole work schedule, your 5-day-a-week work schedule, like imprisoning slave work schedule, that's all a part of all this bullshit. And that you need a government. You don't need a government. You know what the government does? The government has taken away the power of the individual to help one another. Because our world, our true world, is that we are helping one another, and we can govern ourselves together collectively for the better without a governing body. We are the governing body. So even on that basis, if they can get a person on welfare, if they can get a person on any kind of assistance, if they can get a person dependent, you know, even when you're employed, automatically you need to have a bank account, because if you want to get paid, that's the only way they'll pay you. So they just slot you in. If you don't stop agreeing, this is a part of it. This is how we take it back. And this is how we literally completely dismantle their reality.
That's a great point, and that also ties into what I wanted to say before in response to what Carissa said, and also Tom about free will and timeline shuffling and creation. Like, yes, we need to utilize our free will, but most people don't really have free will, but they're under the illusion that they have free will, because they are mechanical, reactionary responses based on their conditioning and programming. And also the way this matrix works and these entities in the hyperdimensional overlords, like you said, Laura, they need our free will consent, right? This is the trap of agreement, right? And it's also from from a humanity's food perspective and consciousness is food. It is more nutritious food if we act out of a free will to align with their agenda, right? And it's not like this evil agenda people think of, Hitler or whatever. It's like, even what I see now, and people get very upset at me, government and politics. This whole hype here in California with Bernie Sanders, the savior image projected in all this worship and projections on this man, with this that creates all food and creates that, that manipulated free will choice to align with their agenda. Even from a basic 3D perspective, Bernie Sanders' socialist agenda ties in perfectly with the New World Order agenda. It's like the perfect prime setup. And like you said, government on the basic level is an iconic creation. People don't even question on the basic level the need for government. We've been living under these systems for so long that, people feel like somebody needs to be in control. There needs to be law and order. Other thing, everything falls apart, which just shows how people are removed from their own inner guidance, from their own divinity, from spirit, from nature, and project the need towards authority outside themselves. That shows you how we are very far away from a collective shift of consciousness. And the cognitive dissonance, and people, like, well, he's going to change the system from within. Same thing people said about Obama. But it is like, it needs to happen out, you cannot solve a problem on the level it was created, but very simply, it's about transcending it, right? Creating a different timeline and not feeding into that manipulated free will choices. So in order to use free will, we have to make conscious choices, and that ties into the whole sincere self-work part of, you cannot wake up without disillusionment. It's painful, it's struggle, it's painful for a lot of people, it doesn't happen overnight. You have to confront a lot. It opens up a can of worms. And even the self-work, it's like you can read books about it, you can read quotes and all of it, but the work itself, like as Goethe said, entails conscious suffering, and it can be messy and painful and like all this shit to fully own, take responsibility for, and really feel, and not escape, detach into the body, into the head, or blame outwardly other people or situation. But this is the shadow work, right? Which it comes down to the hero going into the underworld and saving the princess, which is his own feminine being, and the alchemical marriage of the inner male and female, right? And that ties into the embodiment. And there's a lot of conception about the word embodiment. People think, it's just being in your body, like as if every athlete is then embodied. It's no. They're in touch with like their more physical abilities, but embodiment, the word itself means actually literally in the body. It refers to spirit embodied. It's actually one of the synonyms is incarnation or avatar, means spirit fully anchored in your body. And that's what it's about. That's just that how we protect ourselves and heal ourselves from. But what Carissa talked, I see is also a lot of people with these paranoia, emotional thought projections, and first of all, not really understanding that phenomena, because where there's fear, there's not understanding or lack of application of knowledge, right? Or lack of embodiment, and also lack of sincere self-work. I feel so many people jump into these fringe topics and get obsessed with them and want to like addicted to experiences of what have you experienced and footage and this and that, and don't really understand, take it intellectually and don't understand what it really is all about and how you have to take responsibility in terms of your self-work. And it starts with basic psychological self-work. Like Laura said before, just basic learning how to make boundaries.
Yes.
Your basic emotional intelligence, to basic shadow work that, understanding when you get triggered and emotionally uprised, that's something for you to work on. Can start as simply as road rage. When you get upset, somebody cuts you and you cuss the person out on the road, which you would never say anything to that person in person. You want to create that luge that just these entities feed off of. So it starts on that most basic level, right? And most people like avoid that, and then we have all, shadow is nothing negative. It's just that which is unconscious. There can be dark shadow aspects of like the darker side of shadow of negative emotions, but also positive shadow projection, which also the entities feed off, which ties into worship of gurus, politicians, saviors, authoritarianism, all of that, where we give away our power. So it's really owning our power. And, like everybody else, and Carissa said before as well, we are way more powerful than these entities want to make us believe through their fear tactics, right? And fear in itself is actually also an illusion when you think about it. It's based on time. You're only afraid of what may happen in the present moment, in there, what is there. If you own yourself, are grounded in the body, there's no fear. There may be danger, but you can still have, take responsibility of how you react. If you can check the triggers and the reactive mechanical behaviors. So it really comes down on this most basic level. Like I think Evie said that before, sometimes the solutions are much simpler than we make them to be, right? Like a lot of people get into intellectual research, and it's important to understand that on that level, especially the bigger picture, but you cannot apply knowledge if it's not embodied and you live it. And that's what it comes down to on the basic level on taking responsibility without blame. And, this, what Carissa talked about, and you and Laura, about the sensitive people being very worried what others think, and like, you know, all this stuff. I can actually relate to that, especially what Laura said. It's based on shame and guilt programming, and it took me long to work through this, you know. But it also relates to one's self-importance and really not care, you know, that nobody can take anything away from you, and it, you know, and you can gauge your level of embodiment and way of progressing self-work by the way you get triggered in daily life, by the way you take others people's opinion about yourself important, you know, and how you give away your power and your energy by whatever other person thinks of you or is doing to you. And if you're still engaged in blame or make things interpersonal, you still have work to do. It's that simple on that basic level, you know. Even like, yes, you can talk about entities interfering, and they feed off into that. They inject into these issues and wounds. But, you know, that brings into another issue, which a lot of people contact me, ask me for entity removal, if I know somebody can remove entities, you know. And yes, some people, I've done exorcism on myself simply by starving them, you know what I mean, by making my boundaries, by saying, no, I don't agree, my body, my game, my rules, stay the fuck off. Basically, I cuss them out, you know. So it helps.
I like that. Yeah, it is a boundary thing. I mean, boundaries is something that many people haven't learned who've been through abuse or abduction histories or MK Ultra. They really don't know because they've been invaded all their lives, so that they tend to allow more invasions or normalize dysfunctional behavior and boundary invasions, or they invade others. So it kind of gets to the point I wanted to make about, because some people have been raised in certain environments where certain dysfunctional behaviors are normalized, or the moral compass has been moved from, let's say, ethical to unethical, because they were raised and conditioned that way. And I think our society is being conditioned to move our moral compass from something that is from good and ethical to something that is like any way goes, but it's actually unethical. And it's pulling us away from our spirituality and our ability to discern and our own power. So one of the things that I found was, you know, a lot of people weren't getting things. I think people who've been through abuse, severe abuse for a long period of time, even though they think they're operating, you know, with ethics or whatever it is, but they really don't know. There's these blind spots that just dominate their lives. And so they don't really know what it means to have, let's say, learn how to communicate effectively with compassion or assertiveness, and taking responsibility for yourself, and knowing when you're projecting and when you're not projecting, and knowing what is a safe relationship versus an unsafe relationship. What does that look like, and what are you doing in your relationships that's safe and maybe not safe? And so a lot of people, they don't know this. People don't grow up knowing this. So it's something that has to be learned by a lot of people. If you really care and you really want to take back your own power, you have to relearn and recondition yourself to acting in different ways and actually not selling yourself out. And that's some of the ways that we become invaded, is that we sell out, maybe in a relationship or a work environment or something, that we just, you know, because we need this or that, or we'll let them do what they're doing. And then pretty soon our whole life is infected.
I just wanted to inject something real quick, even on the topic of relationships, especially this day and age. I see a lot of relationships breaking up and going through transformations. You know, and usually what happens as well sometimes, beyond the love bite, dark side of Cupid relationships, but that one person wakes up and starts to question and kind of like does the work, but the partner doesn't wake up. And then there's like needing, you know, forceful trying to wake the other person up, and it's an infringement of free will and like the wishful thinking and just, you know, still trying to make it work. But then it's like, no, it's a diversion of paths. You cannot, you know, and then especially what I also know, anybody who's really not engaged in that sincere self-work and not aware of the hyperdimensional matrix and your close proximity, especially in a relationship, they become a Trojan horse for these entities to work through, like a portal. So you're just in proximity, right? That's exactly comes down to really discernment of who we really engage in, especially on an intimate level, because the relationships takes on a whole new level for, you know, if you start to quote unquote wake up to this reality.
Yeah. So one of the things that I thought I'd share was, I mean, somebody had asked earlier, was like, what is ethical? What is integrity? People don't know what that is because there's so many things that are normalized in this society that we've been conditioned, not only in the Western world, but I think America in particular. And it's something that kind of dawned upon me that a lot of our history has been taken away from us through manipulation, and sometimes even time travel technology and interferences on these kinds of levels. But in the United States, a lot of our own sense of where our roots are spiritually and with respect to our group soul kind of thing, that history is actually being erased over time. And then it's being filled up with a lot of falsehoods and lack of morality, for lack of a better term. Although I think that they've done this through manipulating religion to be something that's so offensive and religiosity programming or judgmental that people just completely turn away from religion because it's done its shame and guilt programming. But then they've turned away from some of the ethical aspects of, just basic goodness and good character and good deeds and some of the more basic things that if we live by these golden rules, which is really our true spiritual essence, we tend to not have as much problems. Sometimes we're still targeted because we want to vibrate this frequency, but you really do have more power when you stay firmly attached to a more ethical approach. So one of the things that I wanted to share was just some really simple basics of, I had a book based on safe relationships. It was actually Christian based, but it doesn't have to be Christian based in order to be ethical. So what I found was useful was basically bullet points of what is unsafe behaviors versus what is safe and good behaviors. And it's amazing that people don't even know what that is. Or they, what I find too is that people don't know what a boundary invasion is, and they don't really understand about boundaries. They hear the word, but they really don't know about it because they've never, been conditioned differently. So anyway, I'll just read the safe versus unsafe since I felt that was a useful thing to know. I'll start with the unsafe and then work on with the safe behaviors. Okay, unsafe people are religious instead of spiritual. They are defensive instead of open to feedback. They are self-righteous instead of humble. They only apologize instead of changing their behavior. They avoid working on their problems instead of just dealing with them. Unsafe people demand trust, but instead of earning it. Unsafe people believe they are perfect instead of admitting their faults. They like to think and pretend they have it all together instead of just admitting their weaknesses. They blame others instead of taking personal responsibility. They lie instead of telling the truth. And along with that is a lot of the slander and gossip kind of things that go on. And stagnant instead of growing. And then unsafe people, actually, they have a negative and corrupting influence on us rather than a positive one. Unsafe people, they will gossip and they won't maintain confidentiality, and they'll do the kinds of things that we discussed, some of the borderline behaviors, where they try to get you to, be a close girlfriend or a close friend, and they buddy up and flatter you, and then they start negative talking about something. They get you to talk about your problems or get vulnerable, and they turn around and use that to completely slander you and talk shit about you. And then they do this without any remorse, like it's normal for them, They may lack true empathy. What defines bad from good is that bad is the unwillingness to admit wrongs, change behaviors, or a desire to do good for self and others, or even the desire to harm and get even instead of doing something more productive. So sometimes people don't even know the difference, okay? And then a safe relationship actually draws us closer to what I call organic source, goodness, heart, divine spirit. It draws us closer to others and helps us become more authentic and ethical. It means being able to be human with empathy for others while having the spiritual grace that can flow through the divine qualities of that higher self of humility and truth. Actually, that discernment comes with that, by the way. They could admit their weaknesses. They're spiritual instead of religious or acting on the programming aspect. They're open to feedback. They're humble. They change behaviors and can apologize and forgive. They're willing to do their healing work, dealing with problems. They take responsibility for their own issues. They can set boundaries with others who are not safe. That's really important. Instead of being a doormat and being really nice, they trust appropriately. They tell the truth instead of lying to others or themselves. They continue to grow in awareness and maturity and the willingness to do so. They can be in this world but not of it and still maintain warmth and connection. And they don't expect others to be perfect, yet they do maintain a discerning self-protection and healthy boundaries. And they can communicate effectively and know how to ask for what they want and need instead of manipulating others to get what they want. So I just wanted to point that out because a lot of people really don't know what that is.
I think that's a really good list. I do think that there's a new kind of predator that has been being created. And I hate to use the word created because I just, I think it's been a project in the making for many generations to create the perfect fractured host who embodies a lot of the positive traits. Okay, this is like a whole new level of the dark side of Cupid because they are, I've studied this just the movements and what's being created in there, like attempts to fracture and use these personality disorders and the influx of these narcissists that have happened. Now it seems like there's more than ever. But there is a new predator that is actually incredible, and they are really getting in certain key spots in the world, and they're targeting a lot of the spiritual culture, key people, but these people have the ability to mask themselves so much to make it look like they've got all the positive qualities that you can't tell it's negative until you're very, very deep in it. And that's sort of a different layer of it. And maybe we can go into that more next time.
Yeah, it's kind of like the guru, the hosted guru that's hosted by a really high level. I don't know if it's it's more than a reptilian, obviously. It's something much more higher on the realm hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because when you do get close, and that's when you get bitten, but by all outward appearances, they can give you bliss. They can do all kinds of things that only the inside people know. And a lot of times they kill them off before they can tell their story.
Exactly. Yeah. Real destruction.
Wow.
Yeah, that will be food for
next time.
Hoping James could add to what you just finished talking about, Evie, in discussing the traits of what's healthy versus non. And
yeah, I'd like to comment on that. It goes back to the seeking the approval of others syndrome, which itself is a manifestation of shame-based upbringing, emotional, physical trauma, whatever the case may be, to the point where the individual is in such people-pleasing, seeking approval mode that they really open themselves up to a lot of manipulation, mind influence, abuse even, because as has been pointed out, they can't set proper boundaries. And so they lose right for the plucking from really narcissistic people. And so like I've seen examples, the Matrix will insert someone into someone's life. And I'm thinking in particular of a gal who was literally a walking, talking, negative, organic portal. All of 20 years, came from a reptilian bloodline family. And I know someone that was a housemate with this hosty person. And the moment this person would walk into the house, there would be an energetic shift. Everything would change. The atmosphere, everything would change, because in the spirit world, as you know, thoughts are things. They're real things. This is why the archontic forces like to mess with our neurology genetics and through other forms of manipulation. So we wind up a lot of times with these OCD thought loops and thoughts of despair and what comes out of this girl who was only about 20 years old is nothing but negative. She'll walk into a room and talking negatively about people that you don't even know or don't even care about. And it's never a question of, oh, this person that you don't know, they just... So it's not even a good thing. It's like, okay, well, I don't know who she's talking about, but at least that person got a puppy, so that's a good thing. It's like she comes in or into the house and just intrudes upon everyone else in that social dynamic and just starts heaping all this abuse and that we don't know, never heard of, don't care about. And what that person has become like a negative energy portal. And having that person as a housemate, it takes the hyperdimensional influence and interference to another level, because whatever are working through that person have now gotten free reign through some kind of tacit agreement of approval to kind of mete out like manipulation, vengeance, interference to anyone else who happens to be in the house. Now, what the person I know did that was in that household dynamic, what she did was she simply disengaged. It was like, no, I'm not going to engage with that person. I have enough self-worth where I'm sitting out on the back patio enjoying the day and watching the birds. I'm not going to sit there any longer and listen to this person talk negative about her negative drama-filled life and about all the negative people in her life that are making her miserable. And of course, she's got to turn around and spread all that negativity on the other person. Treating basically everybody as a negative emotions dumpster is what it amounts to. The things in the spirit world, right? So what my friend did was simply disengage, just like, told her verbally, told her even in a text message, phone to another in the same household. I need space, I need distance. I got too much going on in my life. I don't need that, right? And this 20-year-old girl was a walking train wreck. She fell asleep coming home in a car, crashed into a neighbor's fence. She would bring in weird strangers into the house and just get into arguments with them. And it was a big negative archontic scene. But what it comes down to, we have myriad choices that we either take or we choose not to take. And not making a choice, not making a decision, as it out, is the same as making a decision to allow everything.
I was going to say, tying into what we were talking about earlier in terms of the whole shame-based, I think that was a great way of putting it, Bernard, when you say the shame-based core. Growing up, that's exactly what my upbringing was. It was just constantly being yelled at and screamed at, verbally abused and shamed. Take mountains out of molehills. The littlest thing I would do, it was like it was the worst thing that anyone on the planet had ever done. And that's how my parents reacted to everything. And on top of the extreme level of bullying that was going on outside the home. So all of these things, it was like, looking back in retrospect, you could clearly see that something was really trying so hard, like targeting to get me to just curl into a little ball and just disappear off the timeline. And instead what ended up happening was by the time I was 17, it was like I snapped, and it's like I just stopped giving a flying fuck about anything anymore. It was so over the top for so many years that instead of finally destroying me, I just went the other way. And
that's key, because well-integrated people, or at least people that have done a lot of their self-work, adversity makes them. I've known some couples that are very awake, very aware of the hyperdimensional interference, and try as they might, these negative forces try to drive them apart, try to create physical, emotional, indeed spiritual duress between the couple, within each individual in the couple. But a really switched on a couple that has an organic form of love, that will compel them to to seek comfort and safety with each other. So sometimes that backfires. But that's a very good point you made. It's how the myriad little and not so little decisions we make. Like, for example, very 3D example, Monsanto shares of stock are taking a nosedive. McDonald's shares of stock are making a nosedive because countless people have made a decision not going there. I'm not going to bring my family there to eat their toxic slop. And the same thing at the supermarket. A lot more and more people are making a choice to eat a healthy food way, going to places where they get their food. They're going directly to farmers markets, cutting out these corporate, and that's key. And so it comes down to like this, divesting ourselves of this need to seek the approval of others, divesting ourselves of the need to please, be a people pleaser, because that opens us up to all kinds of abuse and all kinds of to the point where we put their feelings and their sensitivity and their emotions before. And the irony is, often as not, as we all know, these narcissistic sociopathic bores have no empathy. They don't have any real emotions. Relations, the entities and forces working through them are using them as a medium with which to affect our 3D world, and us in particular. So when we give credit, I don't want to hurt this person's feelings, they really mean well. When they're just like a walking, talking train wreck in so many ways, we those a disservice. So when we get to that place in our heart where we can say, no, I'm disengaging, I'm detaching, I'm not going to be a part of this, I'm not letting that person in my life anymore, that's when we really begin to grow, we really begin to change. And that's another one of the
Well, while he's gone, just reminded me something when he talked about not supporting Monsanto, McDonald's, and talking back to the government topic and voting. You know, when you vote, that's on a metaphysical level an agree to be ruled over. It's a trap of agreement. Very basic, right?
Yeah, plus you're saying you're aligning yourself with the person you're voting for, and nobody's perfect. And a lot of these politicians have engaged in God knows what. And like, you know, like you vote for a candidate who, you know, they were a senator who voted to go to war, like with Iraq, Afghanistan, and now they're running for president. You vote for them. It's like you're saying you support all of these things that they've, you know what I'm saying? I wrote about that on my website, actually, like a little blurb about that, about voting and what does that imply on a metaphysical level.
Yeah.
Yes. And Bernard made the point earlier. Bernard made the point earlier about the Bernie Sanders cult of personality. I'm watching this video, and it really shows these people embedded in the matrix, where these, I guess you would call them liberals, socialist collectivists, screaming and hurling and these are just kids. These are like 19, 20-year-old males screaming all this vulgar abuse at Donald Trump supporters. Now, both people, clearly to people like us, they're embedded in the matrix. It's the false left-right syndrome going on. But especially the socialist collectivist mindset that's been imbued in multiple generations by now. And to watch them just hurl other people that are stuck in the same matrix as them, that's a classic example of people who have allowed themselves to be plugged into this consciousness where they've divested any responsibility for self-learning, for self-growth, for self-healing. And people allow themselves to be utilized in this fashion where they become matrix sentinels. Oh, what do you mean you're not getting your child vaccinated? That your child's going to be everyone else's child. They allow themselves to be matrix sentinels. We see this all across the board. So when we get to that point where we're not going to worry about what we think, we're going to do things that are based on our own self-interest, that's when we really begin to make changes in our life. And then we begin to remove these archontic controlled people, all these matrix sentinels in our life, whether it's in the form of people, institutions, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a big part of the healing process, but that we have to be part of a herd. And the manipulation within us and the self-worth issues we have, we're manipulated into not being comfortable in our own, we're manipulated into not being content in our own solitude. We have to be around other people. We have to go along with what though we don't agree with it. Just we go along to get along. We lose ourselves in the process. So when we get to that baseline level of not giving a rip, that's when a lot of healing, a lot of growth, a lot of changes begin to take place.
Yeah, that's even that group pressure and group psychology. That's a topic on its own on a macro level with nations and political affiliations to spiritual groups and anything in between.
And I do think we need to put in our mindset globally that we do not choose door number 1 or 2. Okay, it's not about voting this person or that. It's just maybe you shouldn't be voting, because that's like accepting a government body taking over your life, and their agreements become yours.
Yeah,
So
well, that's part of the game as well.
And half the time, these politicians aren't even that smart. I think, people just make them, they project onto them what they want to see.
They're not environmentalists. Again, just take out the government body, period. It's like, take out everything. Choose door number 3. Fuck it all. Make our own choices. I don't want their door number. They want me to believe that there are only 2 doors to choose from. They want me to believe I can only choose 1 or 2. And they hope that little mind control trick they're doing on me is going to make me go, oh, that's the only choice I have in this reality. Well, you know what? Hey, I have door number 3. It's my door.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if anyone else, but I'm getting tired of every time there's an election, it's Clinton and Bush and these two
I know.
way. It's like, when are we gonna have a reality where we don't have that?
Carissa, I think we talked about it last month when we had our little talk. Like I see a lot of people, like maybe you also can relate to it. People are into my work, read my work, hyperdimensional matrix, all like into it and like talking about their attacks. I interact with them. And next thing I know, I see on Facebook, vote for Bernie Sanders. We need to get Bernie Sanders. I'm like, wow, and there's no judgment, like see what that, but it's like people, the information they take in, what they could truly understand as opposed to what they think they know.
That's the polarity. That's the other thing I want to say, is everything here is rigging everybody on either a positive or a negative polarity. Neither are right. That's all a part of the game. It's controlled opposition.
Yeah.
This whole game set up, this chessboard, is all a series of controlled opposition on the one hand to neutralize you. If you choose this or this, you're already in the polarity. You're neutralized.
That
so
kind of the whole
harvest.
Yeah, it is a harvest. It's forced choices through manipulation to think you have to make this choice or that choice, and then they've hijacked you. You have to make your own choices and stop being manipulated by their manipulation of reality. That those are the only choices.
And the thing about it, I just want to make a quick point, is that these matrix sentinels take on many forms. They could be loved ones, they could be relatives, they could be neighbors, but everything that comes out of them, a lot of these people, is a soundbite. It's something they've heard from someone else. It's something they've heard from TV. They've heard from a bought and paid quackademic. So they literally don't have anything to say meaningfully. Everything they say, everything they think they know came from something else, a tainted source. So again, it's that water off a duck's back kind of thing. When you listen to these people, when you look in the, and you should be able to make a quick judgment. This person is beyond reach. I'm not going to spin my wheels and undo a lifetime of programming. Short conversation. Like, I'm bypassing these enemy strong points. I wish them the best. I wish them well on their journey. I hope they find what they're seeking for. To me, they're an enemy strong point from the standpoint that if I knuckled under, if I had a moment of weakness and I allowed them just for that one moment, okay, you're right, I'm sniffling, I'll get a flu vaccine, right? If I let them have an inroad, because it's the matrix working through that in the form of a matrix sentinel, but I'm aware of that dynamic. I don't judge them. I don't hate on them. I don't look down upon them. I know that each one of us is on our own journey. And some people, quite frankly, need a swift kick in the butt. that the only way their paradigm will change is if something really drastic happens to them. Then they still may not wake up. They still may believe the emergency broadcast and whatever that's being spewed out to them in the case of another big event happening. Events. So I don't judge them. I recognize them for what they are.
Yeah, I mean,
You were
what I've
saying?
described is that, you can, plant your seeds where appropriate. Like, if somebody at your work, says something that reveals that they have some kind of minor level of awareness.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Drop a seed, and if they want to bite, they will, or throw a line, that's the other analogy. But don't try to like forcibly go around waking people up, and
Yes.
don't waste your time on
that's matrix ridden behavior. It is. You're absolutely right, because that is in itself matrix is this compulsion, the self-righteous need to educate everybody and to force feed them into believing what you believe. It's not right. And it's mindless expenditure of mental energy.
Right. And like you said, most people, it's like a lifetime of programming, and you're not going to undo that in a 10-minute thing where you're trying to impose yourself on them. It's like, don't.
That's right.
It kind of goes along the same thing with people want to have their entities removed, or you clear me of implants, and what you see is like years and years of programming and behaviors and lack of self-knowledge that they need to work on themselves before they can, have somebody else do it for them. And it's hard to
what I said. What I said before, in intimate movement, people want to feel they want to have entities removed and feel that's it. That's all what's needed. But, I've worked with other healers who have helped me with entity detachment, so to speak. Like, there's an open wound. It's like surgery. Like, then they come back tenfold. So you need to take care of yourself and work on your shit. It becomes even more serious afterwards. It's not like you remove an entity and you're done and fine.
And I think we're facilitators for them to do it for themselves. And I think that's the key. Because they're looking for the answer, a savior, outside of themselves.
Right.
And I think that we have to distinguish between the difference that no, it doesn't work like that. We are literally facilitators, will help you excavate your own hidden shadows so that you do the work in your own.
Very good point.
Your own savior.
Yes.
Yes.
Stop
Because they have to work
from all.
They have to work past Exactly. They have to work past this notion that they're worthless, that they're powerless, that they're and they can't do anything about their circumstances. This is what causes them to act out in different ways and seek bad association, indulge in substance abuse behaviors, because they're trying to fill the void when they should be, like Bernard says, embodied, be comfortable in their own skin, and love themselves in a narcissistic way, but they still have that survival instinct. So many people are lacking that survival instinct. Now, as we have the ouch factor. Ouch! You're crowding me. You hurt my feelings emotionally and physically. Back off, clown. We've got the ouch. We've got the survival instinct. Too many people are lacking that, and unfortunately now we're seeing generations of people are bringing up their children to just be basically pawns and basically be guinea pigs for this wretched system. Just letting this hypnotic system do whatever they want, shame them into allowing them to use their children as guinea pigs. It's very pervasive. So once we get to that point also where our survival instincts are honed, then we can also really make some inroads into healing and growing.
You know what I wanted to address real quick, what just came to mind in terms of healing, maybe some of you guys can share your experiences, because we talk so much about the hyperdimensional matrix control system, the negative entities and all the manipulation, but there are positive forces in the non-physical realm as well, right? Of course, the New Age has distorted it all, as we know, of contactees and turning abduction to experiences in something positive which was never positive, or the aliens are here to save us and that kind of nonsense, right? Because first of all, higher positive forces who truly on a higher positive level of consciousness know that we need to do the work on our own. we need to learn our own lessons for our soul evolution and soul integration and embodiment. They're not going to save us. They're not going to pull us out of the mess. We need to learn to become our own leaders. And they would also never respond to worship or projection of authority onto them. Only negative entities would, which then pose as positive ones, right? Very important to keep in mind, especially in New Age, right? And then also there's guidance. I see but the guidance come if we I see, the biblically saying, ask and knock and you shall receive, which is, not the whole oversimplification of asking you shall receive in terms of material stuff of reality creation. But the more effort you show out of from your own being, like Gurdjieff said, paying with yourself, the more the universe and spirit will respond and help you on your way and guide you with more positive synchronicities, more the right book, teaching, or person, situation will appear in your life to help you along, right? Not to save you, but to help you learn your lessons, so to speak. And the more we then do our own work, the more we're being guided in these ways. And that's, I feel, how positive forces support us. I've experienced that tremendously when I was doing this workshop at the retreat of my friend in the Peruvian jungle last week. We were there for 9 days, and we did amazing healing work. But we never called in any entities or spirit guides. I knew the more I stay embodied in my own self, my spirit, boom, and do the work, I know we were supported. And I felt this tremendous, you may call it spirits from the jungle or other forces helping us, because we're just created that space, holding that space. But I never called anything in. It was just connecting to who I truly am within, that spirit within, right?
Exactly. And that's where it's at. The answer is with us, and the Savior is us.
I think it's also important, this ties into what you're saying, Bernard, to elaborate a little bit maybe, and this is something Tom knows a lot about, but how, when you have negative forces trying to masquerade as something positive, tricking people and therefore getting into their reality where they can then derail them or do whatever it is that their little agenda is. I know Tom knows a lot about this because he's heard from a lot of people over the years telling him their stories of these types of entities that have tried to kind of reach out and make contact with them, which first off, positive entities do not just come at you and just knock on your door necessarily, banging on your door basically, let me in. So that right there is a red flag sign of that you're dealing with something that doesn't have your best interest in mind. But did you want to elaborate, just because this is important, and because this is happening to a lot of people where they're in contact with entities that are trying to portray themselves as good, and they're not. And people, like Eve, your list of people don't even know how to recognize healthy relationships and behavior. They also don't know how to recognize tricksters and stuff that's masquerading as the good. And so they fall for a lot of stuff, and they let stuff into their reality, which gains a foothold.
Right. Yeah. People, the dark side has created false dichotomies, right, between actual negative boogeymen, or obviously negative, like demons inducing nightmares and creating depression and, addictions and stuff. But they also have created false good guys, which, come in the guise of, I know one lady who, she was being groomed and courted by what she perceived to be an Archangel Michael. Okay. And promising her that if she did what this entity said, basically that she would become his bride in heaven. So, a bit of occult astral bait to lead her along, but all of it was towards the goal of control over a free will entity to feed off that person's spirit and their energy and so on. So yeah, but the difference between these imposter positive entities and the genuine ones, well, obviously, like Carissa said, the imposter ones go out of their way to solicit you because they're salespeople, they're predators. Right, the parasites. So they have to come after you, and they have to gain your cooperation and your free will. They have to gain your attention. And the true positive forces, from my experience, well, first of all, I want to say that if these positive forces didn't exist, then I don't think the negative forces would necessarily have to imitate anything. I think they're imitating in an effort to cover up and to take the place of, and to hijack. Okay. So anyway, back to the whole goal of the idea of positive entities. They're very hands off, and they respect frankness. They don't need you to engage in rituals, like Bernhard said, to pull them in, to invoke them. Okay? They can see your heart, they can see your mind, they can see what your true motivations are. And when you ask, let's say out of boredom or narcissism or just plain curiosity, because I want to experience something weird, so hey, let's have it in, let's go talk to an angel. I mean, they know what's going on there. They're not going to be fooled by that. And if you do a ritual and you do pull something in, you can be pretty much guaranteed that it's not going to be the actual real thing. It's most likely going to be something imitating it. Okay, so so a good example of that would be, well, not to name any names, but certain groups that go out to try to contact UFOs and call them down. They go through these meditation rituals and they invoke these UFO experiences, right? Thinking that now they're communing with these cosmic enlightened grays or whatever. But it's all a big charade, because the couple times where I've sort of attempted that, I got some repercussions.
When you were young, it was like
it was just like years ago.
He was like little.
Like 27.
Can you talk about that, Tom? What happened to you?
Well, here, okay, I'll give two examples. Okay, one time it was on my birthday. I was 27, and I decided to go out for a walk. Now, at this point, I was in this really good mood. Okay, and 27, it's a multiple of 3. 3 and 9, and 9 itself is a multiple of 3. And certain alien groups, they have this thing about the number 3 that's symbolic to them. Maybe some higher spiritual principle, and there's people like Gurdjieff and Maragif and all these other people that talk about 3s and laws of 3 and all this kind of stuff. But anyway, long story short, I had this feeling in the back of my mind. It was a little very quiet question, which was, would you like us to, do a little demonstration for you? Now, I didn't invoke anything. I just felt this in the back of my mind. And without even consciously realizing, I said, okay, well, it would be cool if I picked a constellation in the sky and you kind of flew over and shined a light at me, okay? So I walked up to the top of the hill and I was looking at the constellations, and sure enough, within about 10 seconds, this little bright starlight started moving in from over here, and when it got to that exact spot, it flared up almost like a lighthouse shining its light at you. And then it kind of went on and disappeared. So, but nothing bad came of that, okay? So that's one example. Another night, I willingly went out thinking, hey, maybe I can do it again. But at that point, I wasn't necessarily invited, okay? I was trying to do something strictly out of curiosity that really wasn't my place to do. And when I sort of intended for it again, that night I had a dream. And certain dreams, you can kind of tell that they're not just dreams, because you can almost feel like you're like another intelligence there kind of broadcasting into your mind. Well, in that dream, I basically got a pretty loud warning by these entities saying, don't do that again. And what they're trying to say is, it's almost like you're in a war zone. You just don't want to get in a radio and say, hey, anyone out there want to come to my place and hang out? You don't want to do that, right? Because you don't know what side is going to listen, and they're going to find your position, and boom,
you don't know what you're inviting in is basically what it is.
Yes.
A lot of these people messing around with invoking, so they don't even know what, or given permission to be abducted. You have no idea what it is that's out there, and you just gotta be very careful.
Yeah, because the very first time I made that mistake was when I was 12. I had looked out the window of my car, my mom's car, while we were driving down the highway at night. And back then I was reading a lot of books about grays and abductions, and I didn't know how bad the grays actually were, at least not intellectually. So I said, if you're out there, can you please give me a sign? And I was expecting the stars to fly around or something, but nothing happened. However, that night I had this dream of being on an airplane surrounded by these people with gray faces with black eyes, and I could feel the acceleration of taking off. And the next day I woke up with this scar on my forehead, this 2-inch long hairline scar going right into my hairline. And I know it wasn't there before because, so I got abducted, and I had some abduction issues in the years that followed because I had mentally pictured the grays and I had invited them in. Very bad. Don't ever do that. And there's books out there on Amazon right now saying 10 steps to inviting extraterrestrial contact with the grays. There's children's books saying how to, the grays are good, invite them into your life. So that's some bad stuff going on out there.
Yeah.
And the whole point of this is just to say that there are positive forces, there are imposter forces, and they are kind of similar, but there's reasonable differences between them. Okay, like for example, on my birthday, when I got the little solicitation of mine, it wasn't like, would you let us in, like a malevolent kind of thing. It was more like, we got this narrow window of opportunity. It's your birthday. Maybe I'll give you a little glimpse of something, right? Versus the other times, or some of the people that I've gotten emails from, where, for example, they had a dark shadow hovering over them while they were sleeping, and they heard a voice saying, "Would you let me in?" And they said yes. They said yes. And when the shadow went into them, within a couple of days, they started hearing voices and started getting hallucinations, like induced artificial telepathic dreams. And through these dream scenarios, they would have experiences all night long of, let's say, being on an alien ship or visiting other worlds, but they're actually in their bed being jacked into telepathically by this entity who, in some cases, might not even be an alien. It might be, let's say, a demon or some psychic, discarnate human or something like that, projecting this BS into this person's brain in order to build up this false storyline to get that person under their control. Now, I want to make one brief point, which is some of these entities are strictly opportunists in the sense that they feed off a person. They just want to control them. Okay, big deal. They just do it for sport or for energy or, for whatever. But then there's other entities like certain alien classes that are doing it more for a long-term strategy. And it's these ones that are doing it for the timeline manipulation purposes, let's say to suppress, promising researchers or people watching who might be waking up, for example. So some entities are just in it for a quick feed. They might induce nightmares, might be succubi, incubus type beings. But then there's other ones who are very intelligent and they know you pretty well. They know your psychology, and they basically they go around controlling people, building disinformation vectors. Like a lot of these people you see online spouting some of the crazier stuff about, like, say, like Mars bases and some of the more ludicrous types of super soldier stuff, or really extreme end of the world doom type mindsets. A lot of them, I think, seem to have been groomed or molded by entities that came to them and started giving them false experiences. Okay, so we have to watch out for these possessed, shadowed people, I guess you could say, who do that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's absolutely a wonderful point you made, and I think people need to do assessments with, talking with the person's spirit, being clear about their healing work, and really being honest about discernment and ruling out MK Ultra, ruling out some of this other stuff by really doing the true therapeutic diagnostics instead of just selling the story or, getting these wonderful cases with all these wonderful aliens and not doing the diagnostic work. Because, God, there's a lot of trickery out there.
Yeah, I mean,
I think another thing.
synchronistically, I'd gotten an email from a woman about a week or so ago, and she mentioned that voices that were kind of starting with the whole, like, let us in, let us in. And she was like, well, who are they? Like, who are these that want me to let them in? So basically I advised her on everything that we've been talking about here in terms of, obviously anything positive doesn't operate by trying to coerce you into letting them in. That's just, that right there is the giveaway. And also I explained about the realm breaching thing and gaining a foothold and the whole permissions thing. So I kind of educated her on all of that. So one of the interesting things was I felt this urge when communicating with her about, you need to shut this down. I felt like really intense. I need to tell her that, but also that you need to not give a shit. That was the specific phrase I felt compelled to tell her. You need to not give a shit, because she felt like earlier what we were talking about being self-conscious, like, I can hear them talking about me and stuff, and which sounds like she was schizophrenic, but she actually wasn't. You could tell by her email that she's not schizophrenic, very coherent. But has the stuff happening that makes it sound kind of schizophrenic. And one of those things was being aware that their, stuff is kind of monitoring her and could hear the voices and being like, obviously showing that she's really caring about the fact that, stuff is watching her and talking about her. And that's why I felt compelled to tell her, you need to not give a shit. And funny enough, it turns out that when she had started to experiment with the idea of ignoring them, like, you know what, no, I'm not listening to you anymore, and I don't care what you're saying, go away. She clearly heard in her mind, one of the voices said, oh, she doesn't give a shit. And then that made her have the reverse psychology reaction of like, no, I do care, I do. And like kind of almost like chasing after them, like, no, come back, I do care. And see, I could kind of tell that. And it was funny that I was just really compelled to like, you need to not give a shit. And then it turns out that they were using that tactic to try to get her to give a shit. So hopefully I got through to her and she's going to not she's going to get this stuff out of her reality. But God, who knows how many people this is happening to out there. I mean, that's just a couple of people I've ever heard from, and all the ones Tom's heard from, but what about all the ones we don't hear from? So people who might hopefully be watching this and they can benefit from.
Well,
And on the 3D realm too, also.
Forces that are enough. Sorry, I just wanted to say the benevolent family wants to see us grow up.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to enable us, and they're not going to invade our free will or our sovereignty. They want to see us empowered within ourselves, and so they're happy to just let us grow up and offer what they can without imposing anything.
And a lot of that involves, like, as much as they can get us to hopefully learn on our own instead of spoon feeding, which I think is something you mentioned earlier. Like, they don't just hand you all, as much as you can hopefully learn and figure out for yourself, because that always helps you grow. And so, yeah.
James, did you have?
Yeah, I just like to kind of wrap it up. On the 3D physical plane, it's also important that there's so many sources of information, as it were, on the internet these days. Again, it's a problem of being in one's headspace and being disembodied. Too many people listen to people on the internet, listen to lectures, listen to interviews. From an intellectual standpoint, what they should be doing is listening to what their body is telling them. Do I get a funny feeling in my heart center? Do I get a funny feeling in my solar plexus? Something about this person is saying all the right things. They look good. They smell good. They're saying but there's something that I intrinsically am having a problem with. People have to learn to pay attention to that. It goes back to the lack of self-worth, shame-based, need to seek the approval, need to be a people pleaser syndrome. So when more people do that, and I'll say right now that a lot of these gurus out there particularly target women who are on the path of healing, regeneration, and becoming a powerful spiritual warrior in their own right. There's a whole cottage industry that's sprung up of gurus that are targeting women in particular. They're going after the resurgence of the divine. They're trying to knock it back, but it's not working. So women in particular really need to go within and listen to what their body is telling them.
That's so true. I get so many emails from people where they're really good people. You can tell they actually are smart people, and they have a lot of awareness. And sometimes they articulate things way better than I even could. I mean, they should be writing articles seriously, but they're coming to me to run things by me because they don't trust their own gut. They don't trust and just like, well, why is this happening with so many people? They don't trust their own instincts about anything, and they want external validation from other people to tell them if something's okay or not okay, or if somebody is good news or bad news, and instead of listening to their own voice, their own intuition. So it's
that's right. They have to tune into the environment the way animals do. Animals don't say, "Am I being stalked? Was that a scent I picked up?" No. If they sense a change in the atmosphere, the environment, they bolt. And so we need to get back to the baseline level of situational awareness and heightened awareness all around us.
No, that's very important what you guys said, especially also James, in trusting your bodily sensations, when you interact with a person, which is even harder on the internet, because I see a lot of people, cunning researchers have cunning intellects, and even writers who know how to write the perfect things, even big spiritual teachers, but when you meet them in person, something is very off, right? They can say and imitate the right things. They can be very eloquent, have the huge vocabulary, but it's not embodied. There's something missing.
That kind of goes along with the point of knowing how to discern and knowing, like, say, when there is a predator in our midst, and being able to trust those gut feelings instead of shutting them down. Now, I think self-doubt was one of the biggest issues I realized that I had. And if I didn't doubt myself so much, I wouldn't have gotten into as many situations like in my past. Mm-hmm. So listening to the gut and actually knowing also your blind spots. And that is actually where sharing can help. So sometimes we need each other to help each other know what our blind spots are, but learning how to trust that instinct.
We cannot always do the self-work on our own. That's true.
No.
And I don't believe in mistakes. So even when you're in something that is negative, I do believe it's there to teach you something so you could even get beyond. And those lessons are always more metaphysical. So they're actually blowing through a lot of the coffins and the attempted, how they bury our knowledge from within ourselves. And I find that these relationships we get into and experiences that are negative often are the reason why we break through so much.
Very true. I mean, we mentioned that, I think, on our Love by Plus panel last time, that even the word attack is not really good because it implies victimization. It's a huge initiation if you can read, and it's a teaching. You can apply these forces as teachers.
Exactly.
And there's some people that just do not want to hear that point of view, by the way. They get really angry when, I know that's somebody out there had a big problem with Eve, for instance, because you dare to imply that there should be some level of personal responsibility with people. And boy, it's just, I saw this in a comments thing on the internet, but I'm like, but she's right. And there's people, they don't want to hear that. They want to be completely victimized. It's all on everything else. And they don't want to take any responsibility, and they don't want to learn and grow from it. Like what Laura was just describing. I mean, ideally, yes, it would be nice if we didn't have to go through negative stuff, but you know what? It happens. And if it happens, hopefully we can learn from it and we can grow and you'll become a better person. And if
it's that response, Carissa, I find that these predators that feed on us, usually if their behavior is that they don't want to do the work, it's because they're becoming vampires, just like what's hosting them.
Yes.
So it's an interesting dynamic, the vampire and the vampire and the vampire.
And these are the people that are now reaching out to various researchers out there in the world. Like they just kind of work their way down the line from researcher to research, like emailing them and reaching out to them with their victimization story. And they have become energy vampires. So now they're becoming the very thing that they rant about, and they're imposing that behavior now onto other people.
I think these people in this day and age, what is happening, they're going to disintegrate. It's in this, I feel when the time is about integration or disintegration. A lot of people, even in terms of timeline, I feel what we're experiencing more and more is a timeline reality split. Because I don't see any collective awakening anytime soon, right? There's 7 billion people on this planet with vast different levels of consciousness, from soulless people to more embodied, and vast different individual lessons. So, I think people who are more like aware and do their work, we also naturally, by law of attraction and frequency resonance vibration, attract each other, and we can hold this, and like you said, don't give a shit what other people think. They're going to be left alone. We cannot control, right? And eventually it will reveal to themselves, like whatever's going to happen to them.
And those two frequencies can't stay together. And the more that we're coming into our own integration, the more that they're coming into their disintegration, and those two just can't. If a house divided cannot stand. So essentially,
well, I got a boogie. I got to take care of stuff.
So on that note,
I'll catch up to all of you later.
Wrap it up a bit here, and awesome conversation. And just a final,
really good one.
We're going to do another panel probably on the whole reptilian possession aspect and all that. I figured that might be a good separate talk for next time. So
this recording.
It'll be a good one.
This was wonderful, and thank you everybody for being part of this. And
we'd like to wrap it up with what Carissa said, which is pretty much just say no.
Yeah.
I know. It works for me. All right. Take care, everybody. Bye for now.
Bye, everybody.
All right. Take care.